I've been hauling freight across the Rockies for 11 years now, and Wolf Creek Pass still makes my palms sweat. It doesn't matter how many times I've run it or how confident I feel rolling out of the depot in South Fork. That 10-mile descent from the summit always puts a knot in my chest. The grade runs steep enough that if your brakes start fading, you've got maybe 90 seconds to decide whether you're taking the runaway truck ramp or praying your way into the valley below. I've seen what happens when drivers choose wrong. Burned-out shells twisted against canyon walls, black streaks on the asphalt that take months to fade, memorial crosses nailed to trees with names I'll never forget. The day everything went sideways started ordinary enough. I'd picked up a load of industrial pipe fittings from a fabrication yard in Alamosa, bound for a contractor in Durango. The weight was good, 42,000 pounds, evenly distributed, nothing that should have given me trouble. My rig was a 2019 Kenworth T680 with fresh brake pads, new drums, and a Jake brake that could drop me from 70 to 30 without touching the pedal. I'd done my pre-trip inspection twice, checked the airlines, tested the glad hands, walked the entire length of the trailer looking for anything loose or out of place. Everything was tight. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought. I left Alamosa just after noon, rolled through Monte Vista with a full tank and a thermos of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber but kept me sharp. The sky was that kind of endless Colorado blue, not a cloud in sight, and the radio played classic rock stations all the way to the base of the pass. I remember thinking it was going to be an easy run, the kind where you get home early and don't have to explain yourself to dispatch. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. The climb up the western slope was uneventful. I kept it in 6th gear, let the engine work, and didn't push it. The altitude always steals a little power, but the Kenworth handled it fine. I passed a couple of RVs crawling along at 30 miles per hour, gave them a wide berth, and waved at a park ranger parked in a turnout near the summit. He waved back. Everything felt normal. Everything felt right. By the time I crested the top and started the descent, I was already mentally planning my next load, thinking about the weekend, wondering if I'd have time to swing by my sister's place in Cortez before heading back to the depot. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, just a whiff of something sharp and chemical, like burning plastic or overheated wiring. I sniffed the air inside the cab, checked the gauges, scanned the mirrors. Nothing looked off. No smoke, no steam, no dashboard lights screaming at me. I figured maybe it was coming from outside. Someone ahead of me riding their brakes too hard, or a wildfire smoldering somewhere in the distance. I cracked the window an inch and kept rolling. The descent on the eastern side of Wolf Creek is a different animal. The road doesn't just drop, it plunges, carving tight switchbacks through granite cliffs and dense pine forest. The posted speed limit for trucks is 15 miles per hour, and even that feels ambitious. I downshifted into 4th, engaged the Jake brake, and let the engine do the work. My foot hovered over the brake pedal, barely touching it, just enough to feel the resistance. That's the technique they drill into you in training. Let the transmission hold you back, save the brakes for emergencies, and never, ever ride them hard on a long grade. But the smell got stronger. By the second switchback, it wasn't faint anymore. It was thick, acrid, clawing at the back of my throat. I checked the mirrors again, and this time I saw it. A thin wisp of smoke curling up from the rear axle on the driver's side. Not a lot, but enough to make my stomach drop. I eased off the throttle even more, downshifted to 3rd, and started looking for a place to pull over. There's not a lot of shoulder on Wolf Creek, just narrow strips of gravel barely wide enough for a compact car, let alone a fully loaded semi. I needed space, and I needed it fast. The smoke thickened. Within 30 seconds, it went from a wisp to a steady stream, dark gray and rolling out from under the trailer like something was cooking down there. My heart started hammering. I checked the speedometer, 18 miles per hour and climbing, even though I was in third gear with the Jake brake maxed out. The weight of the load was pushing me forward, gravity doing what it does best, and the brakes weren't holding like they should. I pressed the pedal harder. It went halfway to the floor before I felt any bite, and even then, it was mushy, weak, like pushing on a sponge. Brake fade. That's what they call it when your brakes overheat and lose their stopping power. It happens when you ride them too hard on a long downhill, when the friction generates so much heat that the brake pads glaze over, and the drums expand just enough that the shoes can't grip anymore. It's one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a loaded truck on a mountain pass, and it was happening to me right now, in real time, with no easy way out. I tried pumping the brakes, short bursts to let them cool between applications, but it didn't help. The pedal kept sinking, the smoke kept pouring, and the speedometer kept climbing. 20 miles per hour, 22, 25. The next curve was coming up fast, a sharp right-hander with a guardrail that looked like it was made of toothpicks and hope. I downshifted to second, and the engine screamed in protest. The RPMs redlining, but it bought me a few precious seconds. The rig slowed just enough that I could wrestle it through the turn without flipping, but I could feel the trailer swaying behind me, the weight shifting, the tires scrubbing against the pavement as I fought to keep everything in line. That's when I saw the runaway truck ramp. It was about a quarter-mile ahead on the right side of the road, a long uphill strip of loose gravel designed specifically for situations like this. The idea is simple. If your brakes fail, you aim for the ramp, let the truck roll uphill into the gravel, and the combination of gravity and friction will bring you to a stop. In theory, it's foolproof. In practice, it's terrifying. I've heard stories of drivers who hit the ramp too fast and flipped their rigs end over end, or who missed it entirely and went off the edge instead. But right now, it was my only option. I aimed for the ramp, kept the wheel steady, and braced myself. The truck was doing 30 miles per hour by the time I reached the entrance, way faster than I wanted. But I didn't have a choice. The front wheels hit the gravel and the whole rig lurched violently to the right, the cab shaking so hard I thought my teeth were going to rattle out of my skull. The gravel was deep, up to the axles in some places, and it grabbed the tires like quicksand. I felt the deceleration immediately, a brutal, bone-jarring slowdown that threw me forward against the seatbelt hard enough to knock the wind out of me. The engine roared, the transmission howled, and the whole truck shuddered like it was coming apart at the seams. And then, just like that, we stopped. The nose of the Kenworth was buried in a gravel berm at the top of the ramp. The trailer jackknifed slightly behind me, but we were stopped. We were safe. I sat there for a long moment, hands still gripping the wheel, breath coming in short, ragged gasps, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't let go of the wheel even if I wanted to. I forced myself to breathe. Slow, deep breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The cab smelled like burned rubber and hot metal, and when I finally looked in the mirror, I saw a cloud of smoke still pouring out from under the trailer. I needed to get out and assess the damage, but my legs didn't want to cooperate. It took me a full minute to unbuckle the seatbelt, another 30 seconds to open the door, and when I finally stepped down onto the gravel, my knees almost gave out. The rear axle on the driver's side was glowing, not figuratively, literally glowing, a dull orange red that pulsed in the dim light under the trailer. The brake drum was so hot I could feel the heat radiating off it from 6 feet away, and the smell was overpowering. A mixture of scorched metal, burning rubber, and something else I couldn't identify. Chemical. Wrong. The kind of smell that makes your hindbrain scream at you to get away, get far away, right now. I backed up, pulled out my phone, and dialed dispatch. The call went through, but the connection was weak, crackling with static. I explained the situation as best I could: brake fade, runaway ramp, glowing drum, need a tow, and the dispatcher told me to sit tight, that they'd send someone out. Highway patrol would probably show up first, he said, just to make sure I was okay and to document the incident. Then a wrecker would come to haul the rig off the ramp and down to a shop in Pagosa Springs where they could inspect the brakes and figure out what went wrong. I hung up and stood there, staring at the glowing drum, trying to make sense of it. Brake fade happens, sure, but not like this. Not on a truck that had been inspected less than 8 hours ago. Not with fresh pads and new drums. Something was wrong. Something beyond just rider error or bad luck, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And the longer I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. Not scared, exactly, but off, like I was being watched. I turned around and scanned the tree line. Wolf Creek Pass is remote, surrounded by dense forest and steep terrain, and there's not a lot of human activity once you get away from the highway. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, just beyond the edge of the trees, watching me, waiting. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the adrenaline dump from the near miss was making me jumpy, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. 15 minutes later, I heard the first siren. A Colorado State Patrol cruiser came up the highway from the valley below, lights flashing, and pulled off onto the shoulder just below the runaway ramp. The driver's door opened, and a trooper stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the standard tan uniform and a flat-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. He climbed up the ramp toward me, moving slow and deliberate, and when he got close enough that I could see his face, I recognized him. Eldridge Dane. I'd seen him around before, parked at way stations or cruising the highway during peak travel season. He had a reputation for being fair, but thorough. The kind of cop who didn't write tickets just to meet a quota, but also didn't let anything slide. He looked me over, then looked at the truck, then looked back at me. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice was deep, calm, the kind of voice that probably worked wonders in tense situations. "No, sir," I said. "Just shaken up." He nodded, walked past me toward the trailer and crouched down to inspect the glowing drum. He didn't touch it. Nobody with half a brain would touch something that hot. But he got close enough that I saw his expression change. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and he stood up slowly, like he was trying not to make any sudden movements. "How long you been hauling?" he asked, still staring at the drum. 11 years, I said. "You ever seen brake fade this bad?" "No, sir. Not even close." He pulled a flashlight from his belt and shone it under the trailer, sweeping the beam back and forth along the axle, the brake lines, the suspension. He spent a long time looking at something near the front of the trailer, something I couldn't see from where I was standing, and when he finally stood up, his face was unreadable. "Who loaded your trailer?" he asked. "Fabrication yard in Alamosa," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked back down the ramp to his cruiser, popped the trunk, and pulled out a camera. When he came back up, he started taking pictures, dozens of them from every angle, focusing on the drum, the axle, the underside of the trailer. He didn't explain what he was doing, didn't ask for my input, just worked methodically like he was documenting evidence at a crime scene. "What's going on?" I asked. He lowered the camera and looked at me. "You ever check your weight before you left Alamosa?" "No," I said. "Didn't need to." Load was pre-weighed at the yard. Bill of lading said 42,000 pounds. "You sure about that?" I pulled the paperwork from my jacket pocket and handed it over. He scanned it quickly, then handed it back. "Get in your cab and check your weight distribution," he said. "Use your onboard scale if you've got one." I did. The Kenworth had an integrated scale system that could estimate the weight on each axle based on air pressure in the suspension. I climbed into the cab, powered up the system, and watched the numbers populate on the dash display. Front axle, 12,000 pounds. Normal. Rear drive axles, 34,000 pounds. Way over. Trailer axles, 18,000 pounds. Way under. The numbers didn't make sense. If the total load was 42,000 pounds, and the trailer axles were only carrying 18,000, that meant the weight was concentrated way too far forward, putting excessive strain on the drive axles and the brakes. But that shouldn't have been possible. The load had been secured by professionals, balanced and strapped according to DOT regulations. Unless... I climbed back out and told Dane what I'd found. He nodded, like he'd expected it. "Someone moved your load," he said, "or added to it." "What?" "Your weight's off, way off, and your brake lines." He paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. "They've been tampered with." My blood went cold. Tampered with how? Small puncture in the rear line. Not enough to cause a full failure, but enough to let air leak slowly, reduce brake pressure over time. Combined with the extra weight on your drive axles, it would have caused exactly what you experienced. Brake fade on a long descent, with just enough stopping power left to make you think you could handle it, right up until you couldn't. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Someone had sabotaged my truck. Not an accident, not a mechanical failure, but deliberate sabotage. And if I hadn't made it to the runaway ramp, if I'd missed it by even a few feet, I would have gone over the edge and taken the whole rig with me. "Who would do that?" I asked. Dane didn't answer. He was looking past me, up the highway toward the summit, and his expression had gone hard. I turned to follow his gaze and saw a wrecker rolling slowly down the grade, lights flashing, engine growling. It was a big one, a heavy-duty rotator capable of lifting and towing fully loaded semis, and as it got closer I could see the name painted on the door, Veldon Recovery. The wrecker pulled off onto the shoulder and a man climbed out. Short, wiry, wearing grease-stained coveralls and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Hoyt Veldon. I didn't know him personally, but I'd seen his trucks around. He ran one of the few towing operations that serviced Wolf Creek Pass, and he had a reputation for being fast, efficient, and expensive. He walked up the ramp toward us, hands in his pockets, moving with the kind of casual confidence that comes from doing the same job 1,000 times. When he reached Dane, he nodded once, then looked at me. "Heard you had some brake trouble," he said. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of cigarettes and mountain air. "That's putting it mildly," I said. He walked past me to inspect the truck, and I watched as he did the same thing Dane had done. Crouched down, looked under the trailer, spent a long time staring at something I couldn't see. When he stood up, he wiped his hands on his coveralls and looked at Dane. "You see what I'm seeing?" Veldon asked. Dane nodded. "Yeah." "What?" I asked. "What are you seeing?" Neither of them answered. Veldon walked back down to his wrecker and started pulling chains and rigging from the bed, while Dane pulled me aside, away from the truck, away from Veldon, far enough that we couldn't be overheard. "Listen," Dane said, keeping his voice low. "Something's not right here. The brake line, the weight distribution, the way your load shifted. None of it adds up." And Veldon, he paused. "He's been the first responder to 6 runaway incidents on this pass in the last 18 months. 3 of them were fatal. In every case, the trucks had the same issue. Tampered brake lines and shifted loads." I felt my stomach twist. Are you saying he's involved? I'm saying I don't trust coincidences, Dane said. And I'm saying you need to be careful. Don't sign anything. Don't let him take your truck until I've had a chance to document everything. And if he asks you about your route or your cargo, tell him you need to call your lawyer first. I don't have a lawyer. Then lie. Dane walked back to his cruiser and started making calls, while Veldon continued rigging the wrecker to my truck. I stood there, caught between them, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. My truck had been sabotaged. Someone had tampered with my brakes, shifted my load, and sent me down Wolf Creek Pass with just enough stopping power to make it look like an accident. And now, the guy who was supposed to tow me to safety was potentially connected to multiple fatalities on this exact stretch of road. I wanted to run. I wanted to get in my truck, fire it up, and drive straight down the mountain. Brake, fade be damned. But I couldn't. The rig was stuck in gravel up to the axles, the brakes were shot, and even if I could move, Dane would probably arrest me for leaving the scene. So I stayed and I watched, and I waited for whatever came next. Veldon worked fast, too fast. He had the chains hooked up and the wrecker's boom positioned in less than 10 minutes, moving with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing the same job hundreds of times. But there was something mechanical about the way he moved, something that didn't quite fit. Most tow operators I've seen take their time, double-check everything, make conversation while they work. Veldon didn't say a word. He just hooked, tested, adjusted, and moved on to the next connection point like he was following a script he'd memorized years ago. Dane was still on the phone by his cruiser, his back turned to us, but I could see him glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. He was watching Veldon just as closely as I was, and that made my unease worse. If a state trooper with years of experience didn't trust this guy, why the hell was he the one towing my truck? I wanted to ask, wanted to pull Dane aside and demand answers, but I kept my mouth shut. Something told me that making a scene right now would be the wrong move. Veldon finished rigging the front of my Kenworth and walked back to check the trailer connections. He moved around to the driver's side, the same side where the brake drum was still glowing faintly, and crouched down. He stayed there for a long time, longer than seemed necessary, and when he finally stood up, he was holding something small in his gloved hand. From where I was standing, I couldn't see what it was, but I saw him glance toward Dane's cruiser, then quickly shove whatever it was into his pocket. That was it. That was the moment I knew for certain something was wrong. I started walking toward him, my boots crunching on the gravel, and he must have heard me coming because he turned around fast, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. He didn't look guilty exactly, but he looked caught, like a kid who'd been reaching for the cookie jar and suddenly realized someone was watching. "Everything good?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Yeah," Veldon said. "Just checking your brake line connections, making sure nothing's gonna leak during the tow. Find anything?" He stared at me for a beat too long, then shook his head. "Nope, everything's secure." I didn't believe him, but I also didn't know what to do about it. Accusing him outright would put me in a bad position, especially if I was wrong, but letting it slide felt even worse. I glanced back toward Dane, hoping he'd finished his call and could step in, but he was still on the phone, pacing back and forth near the front of his cruiser, his expression grim. Veldon walked past me toward his wrecker, pulling a clipboard from the passenger seat. "I'm going to need you to sign off on the tow," he said, flipping through a stack of forms. "Standard liability waiver, mileage log, damage assessment. Takes 2 minutes." I took the clipboard and scanned the forms. They looked legitimate enough, standard towing paperwork with all the usual disclaimers and legal jargon, but something about the way Veldon was watching me made my skin crawl. He wasn't just waiting for me to sign, he was studying me, reading my body language, looking for something. Hesitation, maybe, or compliance. "I need to call my dispatcher first," I said, handing the clipboard back. "Company policy. Can't sign anything without clearing it with them." Veldon's jaw tightened, just barely, but enough that I noticed. "Your dispatcher already approved the tow. That's why I'm here." "I still need to confirm," I said. "Won't take long." I pulled out my phone and stepped away, putting some distance between us. I didn't actually call dispatch. There was no point. They'd already sent Veldon, but I needed time to think. Something was wrong with this whole situation, and I was stuck in the middle of it with no clear way out. My truck was immobilized, my brakes were shot, and the only person who could get me off this mountain was a guy who'd just pocketed something from under my trailer after the state trooper told me not to trust him. Dane finally finished his call and walked back up the ramp toward us. His expression was unreadable, but I could see tension in the way he carried himself, like he was preparing for a confrontation. He stopped between me and Veldon, looked at the wrecker setup, then looked at Veldon. "You find anything unusual?" Dane asked. "Nope," Veldon said. "Standard brake fade. Driver rode them too hard on the descent. Happens all the time. That right?" Dane's tone was flat, neutral, but there was an edge underneath it. Veldon shrugged. "That's what it looks like to me." Dane nodded slowly, then turned to me. "You got a flashlight?" I did. I grabbed it from the cab and handed it over. Dane walked to the driver's side of the trailer, crouched down where Veldon had been standing earlier, and started inspecting the brake lines. He took his time, running his gloved fingers along the steel tubing, checking the fittings, examining every inch of the system. Veldon watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression still neutral but his posture stiff. After about 5 minutes, Dane stood up and motioned for me to come over. I did, and he pointed the flashlight beam at a section of brake line near the axle. "See that?" he said quietly. I leaned in closer. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just the standard steel tubing, a little road grime, some surface rust. But then Dane adjusted the angle of the light and I saw it. A small puncture, maybe the size of a pin, right where the line curved around a mounting bracket. It was barely visible, the kind of thing you'd miss unless you were specifically looking for it, but it was there. And more importantly, the metal around the puncture was clean. Not rusted, not corroded, but clean and fresh, like it had been made recently. "That's not wear and tear," Dane said, still keeping his voice low enough that Veldon couldn't hear. "That's deliberate." My stomach dropped. "You're sure?" "Positive. Someone used a punch or a drill bit, something small and precise to create a slow leak. It wouldn't cause a catastrophic failure, but it'd reduce your brake pressure just enough to make you think you were losing them naturally. Combined with the weight shift, it's a perfect setup." "Setup for what?" Dane didn't answer. He just stood up, turned off the flashlight, and walked back toward Veldon. I followed, my mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Someone had sabotaged my truck. That much was clear. But who and why? And more importantly, was Veldon involved, or was he just the unlucky bastard who happened to respond to the call? "I'm impounding the truck," Dane said to Veldon. Veldon's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that I caught it. Surprise, maybe frustration. "On what grounds?" he asked. "Evidence tampering. Possible criminal sabotage. I need to document everything before it gets moved." "I've already got it rigged. You're going to make me unrig it?" "That's exactly what I'm going to make you do." Veldon stared at Dane for a long moment, and I could feel the tension between them thickening, coiling like a spring ready to snap. Then, without a word, Veldon turned and walked back to his wrecker. He started unhooking the chains, moving slower now, deliberately slow, like he was making a point. Dane watched him the entire time, one hand resting casually on his duty belt, close to his sidearm. I stood off to the side, feeling like a spectator at a standoff I didn't fully understand. My truck was evidence now, which meant I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. But that also meant I was safe, at least for the moment. Whatever Veldon had been planning, Dane had just thrown a wrench into it. It took Veldon another 15 minutes to disconnect everything. When he finished, he walked back to Dane and handed him a business card. "You want it towed, you call me. I'm the only operator on this pass with a rotator big enough to handle a loaded semi." "I'll keep that in mind," Dane said, pocketing the card without looking at it. Veldon climbed into his wrecker, fired up the engine, and rolled back down the ramp onto the highway. He didn't look at me, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge my existence. Just drove away, heading west toward the summit, and disappeared around the first curve. The sound of his engine faded slowly, swallowed by the distance and the dense forest, and then it was just me and Dane standing on the runaway ramp in the fading afternoon light. "What now?" I asked. "Now we wait," Dane said. "I've got a forensic team coming up from Alamosa. They'll document everything, take samples, photograph the brake lines and the load. Then we'll figure out who had access to your truck and when." "How long is that going to take?" "Could be a few hours. Could be overnight." He looked at me. "You got somewhere to stay?" "Not really. I was planning on making Durango by nightfall. There's a motel in Pagosa Springs, about 20 miles down the mountain. I can give you a ride once the team gets here." I nodded, grateful but still uneasy. The adrenaline from the brake fade was starting to wear off, replaced by exhaustion and a creeping sense of paranoia. Someone had tried to kill me. That's what Dane was implying, even if he wouldn't say it outright. Someone had tampered with my truck, shifted my load, and sent me down one of the most dangerous mountain passes in Colorado, hoping I wouldn't make it to the bottom. And the only question that mattered now was, why? We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the pines. The sun was starting to dip behind the peaks to the west, casting long shadows across the ramp, and the temperature was dropping fast. I could feel the cold seeping through my jacket, settling into my bones, and I realized I was shaking. Not from the cold, but from everything else, the fear, the confusion, the knowledge that I'd been inches away from dying and I still didn't know who'd put me there. "You ever work with Veldon before?" Dane asked suddenly. "No, never even met him until today." "What about your dispatcher? He ever mentioned Veldon's company?" I thought about it. "Not that I remember." "Why?" "Just trying to connect dots." Dane pulled out a small notebook and started writing. "How many people knew your route today?" "Dispatcher, obviously. The loader crew at the Alamosa yard. Maybe a couple other drivers at the depot." "Why? You think one of them—" "I don't think anything yet," Dane said. "But someone knew where you were going, what you were hauling, and when you'd be on Wolf Creek. That's not random, that's planned." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I'd been driving trucks for over a decade, hauling everything from produce to heavy machinery, and I'd never once worried about someone targeting me. Sure, cargo theft happens, hijackings happen, but sabotage? That was something else entirely. That was personal. "You think Veldon's involved?" I asked. Dane didn't answer right away. He just kept writing in his notebook, flipping pages, cross-referencing something. Finally, he looked up. 6 incidents in 18 months, he said. All of them on this pass. All of them involving loaded semis with brake failures. 3 fatalities, 2 serious injuries, 1 guy who walked away with nothing but psychological trauma. Every single time, Veldon Recovery was the first responder. That doesn't mean he's involved. Maybe he's just good at his job. Maybe, Dane said. Or maybe he's got a police scanner and knows exactly when and where to show up. Or maybe someone's feeding him information. Like who? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Another silence. I looked down at my truck, still half buried in gravel, and tried to imagine someone deliberately sabotaging it. Who would benefit from my death? Insurance fraud? Cargo theft? Revenge? None of it made sense. I was nobody. Just another driver hauling pipe fittings across the Rockies. Nothing special, nothing valuable, nothing worth killing over. Unless it wasn't about me at all. What if it's not personal? I said. What if someone's targeting drivers at random, just to see if they can get away with it? Dane looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then we've got a bigger problem than I thought. We heard the vehicles before we saw them. 2 SUVs coming up the highway from the east, moving fast. Emergency lights flashing. They pulled off onto the shoulder below the ramp and 4 people climbed out. All wearing windbreakers with Colorado Bureau of Investigation printed across the back. Dane walked down to meet them, and I watched as he briefed them, pointing up at my truck, gesturing toward the brake lines, handing over his notes. One of them, a woman with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, walked up the ramp toward me. She introduced herself as a field investigator and asked if I was injured. I told her I was fine, just shaken up, and she nodded sympathetically. Then she asked me to walk her through everything. When I'd picked up the load, where I'd stopped, who I'd talked to, every detail I could remember. I did my best, but the more I talked, the more I realized how little I actually knew. I couldn't remember the names of the loader crew in Alamosa. I didn't know if anyone had been near my truck while I was inside the office signing paperwork. I hadn't checked the seals on the trailer doors because the load was supposed to be secure. That's normal, the investigator said, sensing my frustration. Most drivers don't expect sabotage. Why would you? You're just doing your job. So what happens now? I asked. We document everything. Photograph the truck, collect samples from the brake lines, check the load for tampering. Then we'll pull records from the Alamosa yard, security footage, employee logs, anything that might tell us who had access to your truck. It'll take time, but we'll figure it out. And in the meantime, you stay safe. Don't drive alone if you can help it. Don't take loads from unfamiliar shippers, and if anything feels off, call us immediately. She handed me a business card with her name and direct line. I pocketed the card and watched as the team got to work. They moved with practiced efficiency, setting up lights and cameras, cordoning off the area with yellow tape, treating my truck like a crime scene. Which I guess it was. Dane stayed close, supervising, occasionally stepping in to point out something or answer a question. And I just stood there feeling useless and scared and angry all at once. The sun dropped below the horizon, and the temperature plummeted. One of the investigators brought me a thermal blanket and a bottle of water, and I wrapped myself up and sat on a boulder near the edge of the ramp, watching the team work. The lights they'd set up cast harsh shadows across the truck, making it look alien and unfamiliar, like it wasn't even mine anymore. And maybe it wasn't. Maybe it never would be again. Around 8 o'clock, Dane walked over and told me they were almost done. The forensic team had collected everything they needed, and they'd arranged for a different towing company, one based out of Durango, to come up in the morning and move the truck to a secure impound lot. He offered to drive me down to Pagosa Springs like he'd promised, and I accepted gratefully. We climbed into his cruiser and headed down the mountain. The descent was slow and careful, Dane taking the curves at half the posted speed limit, and I was grateful for it. I'd had enough adrenaline for one day. We didn't talk much during the drive. I stared out the window at the dark forest rolling past, and Dane kept his eyes on the road, occasionally checking his mirrors like he was watching for something. About halfway down, he spoke. "You ever hear of a guy named Merrick Bray?" I shook my head. "No, who's he?" "Driver out of Grand Junction. Ran loads through Wolf Creek maybe 3-4 years ago. Had a brake failure just like yours, only he didn't make it to the runaway ramp. Went off the edge near mile marker 168. Truck rolled 4 times before it hit bottom. He survived, barely, but he was never the same. Spent 6 months in a hospital, another year in physical therapy. Lost his CDL, lost his livelihood." Jesus. Yeah, and here's the thing. His truck had the same issue. Punctured brake line, shifted load, everything set up to look like an accident. But nobody investigated it, no forensic team, no CBI, nothing. Everyone just assumed it was driver error and moved on. "Why are you telling me this?" Dane glanced at me. "Because Veldon towed his truck too." My blood ran cold. "You think Veldon's been doing this for years?" "I think someone has. Whether it's Veldon or someone working with him, I don't know yet. But the pattern's there. And now that we've got evidence, we can start connecting the dots." We reached Pagosa Springs just after 9. Dane dropped me off at a small motel near the edge of town, a rundown place with flickering neon and cracked pavement. But it was clean and cheap, and I didn't care. He gave me his card and told me to call if I remembered anything else, or if anything unusual happened. I thanked him, checked into a room on the 2nd floor, and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the lights on, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The smell of burning brakes, the smoke pouring from the drum, the way Veldon had moved, calm and efficient, like he'd done it all before. The punctured brake line, the shifted load, the business card Dane had pocketed without looking at. And then I remembered something small, something I'd dismissed at the time but now felt significant. When I'd picked up the load in Alamosa, the yard foreman had mentioned that the original driver, the guy who was supposed to haul this load, had called in sick that morning. Last-minute cancellation, he'd said. They'd scrambled to find a replacement, and I'd been the only one available. Which meant someone had known the original driver wasn't coming, and someone had made sure I was the one who took his place. I grabbed my phone and called Dane. He answered on the 2nd ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "I just remembered something," I said, and I told him about the last-minute driver swap. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, "I'll follow up on that first thing in the morning. In the meantime, keep your door locked and don't open it for anyone." "I'm serious, anyone." "You think I'm still in danger?" "I think someone went to a lot of trouble to put you on that mountain today, and if they're willing to sabotage a truck, they might be willing to do worse." He hung up, and I sat there on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, feeling the fear settle back into my chest like a weight. I checked the door lock 3 times, wedged a chair under the handle, and pulled the curtains closed. Then I sat with my back against the headboard, fully dressed, boots still on, and waited for morning. Somewhere outside, a semi rolled past on the highway, its engine rumbling low and steady. The sound faded slowly, swallowed by distance, and I wondered where that driver was headed. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were. And I wondered if I'd ever feel safe behind the wheel again. Morning came slow and gray. I'd managed maybe 2 hours of sleep, broken into 15-minute chunks, interrupted by every sound outside. Car doors slamming, voices in the parking lot. the ice machine groaning down the hall. Each time I jerked awake, I'd check the door, check the windows, check my phone for messages. Nothing. Just silence and the slow crawl of minutes toward dawn. Around 6:30, I gave up on sleep entirely and took a long shower, letting the hot water beat against my neck and shoulders until the motel's ancient water heater gave out. I dressed, packed my duffel, and sat on the edge of the bed waiting for Dane to call. He'd said he'd follow up on the driver swap first thing in the morning, but first thing in law enforcement time could mean anything from 7 a.m. to noon. I needed coffee and food, but I didn't want to leave the room in case he called. At 7:15, my phone rang. Dane's number. "I need you to come down to the station," he said, skipping pleasantries. "We found something." "What kind of something?" "The kind I can't talk about over the phone. There's a diner 2 blocks north of the Arcoleta County Sheriff's Office. Meet me there in 30 minutes. He hung up before I could ask questions. I grabbed my jacket, checked out of the motel, and drove my rental. A compact sedan the insurance company had arranged, through the quiet streets of Pagosa Springs. The town was small, built around hot springs and tourism, and at this hour it was mostly empty except for a few early risers heading to work. I found the diner easily enough, a retro-style place with chrome trim and vinyl booths, and Dane was already inside, sitting in a corner booth with a mug of coffee and a folder thick with papers. I slid into the seat across from him. He looked tired, like he'd been up all night, and there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. He pushed a menu toward me without saying anything, and I ordered coffee and eggs from a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Once she was gone, Dane opened the folder and pulled out a series of photographs. He laid them on the table between us, each one showing a different angle of my truck, the punctured brake line, the shifted load, the glowing drum. Then he pulled out another set of photos, older ones, grainy and slightly faded. Different trucks, different locations, but the same details. Punctured brake lines, shifted loads, the same mechanical fingerprint. "These are from the other incidents," Dane said, tapping the older photos. 4 of them, 2 from Wolf Creek, 1 from Monarch Pass, 1 from Red Mountain, all within the last 3 years, all involving drivers who had last-minute route changes or driver swaps, just like you. I stared at the photos, my stomach tightening. Someone's been doing this for 3 years? At least. Could be longer. These are just the ones where we have physical evidence. There could be others that were written off as accidents before anyone thought to look closer. He pulled out another document, a printed spreadsheet with names, dates, and locations. Here's the pattern. Every single incident involved a load originating from a specific set of fabrication yards or distribution centers, all of them in the San Luis Valley, Alamosa, Monte Vista, Del Norte, and every single time Veldon Recovery responded within 30 minutes. "That's not possible," I said. "Wolf Creek is remote. There's no way he could get there that fast unless he was already nearby," Dane finished. "Which means either he's monitoring police scanners and positioning himself in advance, or someone's tipping him off." "Who?" Dane leaned back, his expression grim. "That's what I spent all night trying to figure out. I pulled dispatch records, towing contracts, insurance claims, and I found something interesting. Veldon Recovery has an exclusive contract with 3 major trucking insurance providers. Any time one of their insured drivers has an incident on a mountain pass in this region, Veldon gets the call automatically. No bidding, no competition, just him. Is that legal? Technically, yes. Insurance companies can contract with whoever they want. But it's unusual, especially for a small operation like Veldon's. Most companies spread the work around to avoid conflicts of interest. But these 3 providers, they only use him, and all 3 of them insure drivers hauling out of the San Luis Valley. The waitress brought my coffee and eggs, and I waited until she was gone before speaking. "So, what are you saying? Veldon's got some kind of deal with the insurance companies? I'm saying it's suspicious, and I'm saying we need to find out who the original driver was, the one who called in sick yesterday, and why." I took a sip of coffee, my mind racing. "You think he was in on it? Maybe. Or maybe someone made sure he couldn't make the run. Either way, we need to talk to him." Dane pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. "Name's registered as Eugene Adderley. Works out of the same depot you do. I tried calling him this morning, but his phone's disconnected. Went by his listed address in Alamosa, nobody home. Neighbors say they haven't seen him in 2 days." A chill ran through me. "You think something happened to him?" "I think it's too much of a coincidence that he disappeared the same day you nearly died on Wolf Creek Pass." Dane gathered the photos and slid them back into the folder. "I've got a bolo out on him, but in the meantime, I need you to think. Did you notice anything unusual at the Alamosa yard? Anyone watching you? Anyone asking questions about your route?" I thought back, trying to remember. The yard had been busy, forklifts moving pallets, loaders shouting over the noise of engines and air wrenches. I checked in at the main office, signed the paperwork, and waited while they loaded the trailer. Standard procedure. I hadn't noticed anyone paying particular attention to me, but then again, I hadn't been looking. "There was a yard foreman," I said slowly. "Older guy, maybe 60. He's the one who told me about the driver swap. Said Eugene had called in that morning. Food poisoning or something. He seemed frustrated about it, like it had screwed up the schedule. You remember his name?" I shook my head. He was wearing a company vest, but I don't think I caught his name. "Just talk to him for a minute or two." Dane made a note. "I'll pull employee records from the yard, see if anyone stands out." He paused. "What about after the load? Did you stop anywhere between Alamosa and Wolf Creek?" "Just once. Gas station in Monte Vista. Filled up, used the restroom, grabbed a coffee, maybe 15 minutes total." "You leave the truck unattended?" "Yeah, but I locked it. And I checked the seals on the trailer when I came back. They were intact." "Seals can be replaced," Dane said quietly. "If someone knew what they were doing, they could pop the original, shift the load, and put on a new one. You'd never know the difference unless you checked the serial numbers." My hands tightened around the coffee mug. The idea that someone had been inside my trailer, moving things around, sabotaging the weight distribution while I was inside a gas station buying coffee, it made my skin crawl. I'd been so careful, so thorough with my pre-trip inspection, and it hadn't mattered. They'd gotten to me anyway. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. "Now I keep digging. And you stay visible. Don't go anywhere alone, don't take any loads until this is sorted out, and if you see Veldon or anyone associated with his company, you call me immediately, understand?" I nodded. Dane slid a second business card across the table, this one with a different number written on the back in pen. "That's my personal cell. It's on 24/7. If anything feels wrong, you use it." We finished our coffee in silence, and then Dane walked me out to the parking lot. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement, and for a moment everything felt almost normal, almost safe. But I knew better. Someone out there wanted me dead, and until we figured out who and why, I was still a target. Dane drove off toward the sheriff's office, and I sat in my rental car staring at the folder of photos he'd left with me. I flipped through them again, looking for something I'd missed, some detail that would make everything click into place. But all I saw were broken trucks and punctured brake lines and the faces of drivers who'd trusted the wrong people. I drove back to Alamosa. I don't know why. Dane had told me to stay put, to keep a low profile. But I needed to see the yard again, needed to walk through the space where my truck had been loaded and try to remember if I'd missed something. The drive took about an hour, and I spent most of it checking my mirrors, watching for vehicles that stayed too close or followed too long. Paranoia, maybe, but it felt justified. The fabrication yard looked different in daylight. Busier, louder, with trucks coming and going in a steady stream. I parked near the main office and walked through the gate, keeping my head down, trying not to draw attention. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even looked at me. I made my way to the loading area where my trailer had been staged, and I stood there, studying the ground, the tire tracks, the oil stains on the concrete. Nothing stood out. It was just a loading dock, same as 1,000 others I'd seen. But then I noticed something near the edge of the lot, partially hidden behind a stack of empty pallets. A security camera, old and dusty, its lens pointed toward the loading area. I walked over to it, checked the angle. It had a clear view of where my truck had been parked. I went back to the main office and asked the clerk behind the counter about the security footage. She was a younger woman, early 20s, with purple streaks in her hair and a name tag that said Bryn. She looked at me like I'd asked her to solve a calculus equation. "We don't really use those cameras," she said. "They've been broken for like 2 years. Company keeps saying they'll fix them, but," she shrugged. "All of them are broken?" "I think so. I mean, I've never seen anyone check the footage. Why?" I didn't answer. I just thanked her and walked back outside. If the cameras were broken, that meant there was no way to verify who'd been near my truck while it was being loaded. No way to prove or disprove tampering. Convenient. Too convenient. I was heading back to my car when I saw him. The yard foreman from yesterday, the one who'd told me about Eugene calling in sick. He was standing near the maintenance shed, talking to someone I couldn't see. His back turned to me. I started walking toward him, planning to introduce myself properly, ask him a few questions about the loading process. But before I could get close, he turned around and I got a clear look at his face. He wasn't the same guy. Same build, same age range, same company vest. But the face was different. Narrower, with a scar running across his left cheek that I definitely would have remembered. I stopped mid-stride, confused, and he noticed me staring. His expression shifted, just slightly, but enough that I saw it. Recognition, not friendly recognition, the kind that says, "I know who you are, and I wasn't expecting to see you here." He said something to the person he'd been talking to, then turned and walked quickly toward the back of the yard, disappearing between 2 rows of stacked containers. I didn't follow. Something about the way he'd moved, the speed and purpose of it, told me that approaching him would be a mistake. I got back in my car and called Dane. He answered immediately. "I'm at the Alamosa yard," I said, "and I think I just saw the foreman who loaded my truck yesterday, except it's not the same guy." "What do you mean, not the same guy?" "I mean the person I saw yesterday and the person I just saw now. They're 2 different people. Same vest, same position, but different faces." There was a pause. "You're sure?" "Positive. The guy yesterday had a round face, no visible scars. This guy had a scar across his cheek. I would have remembered that." "Stay where you are," Dane said. "Don't approach anyone. I'm on my way." He hung up, and I sat in the parking lot, engine running, watching the entrance to the yard. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. Someone was impersonating yard staff. Someone had access to company vests and credentials and knew exactly when and how to insert themselves into the loading process, which meant this wasn't just opportunistic sabotage. This was organized, planned, professional. 20 minutes later, Dane's cruiser pulled into the lot, followed by a second unmarked vehicle. Dane got out, along with a plainclothes investigator I recognized from yesterday's forensic team. They walked over to my car, and I stepped out to meet them. "Show me where you saw him," Dane said. I led them to the maintenance shed, pointing out where the fake foreman had been standing. The area was empty now, no sign of anyone, but Dane and the investigator started searching anyway, checking the ground, the shed, the stacked containers. After a few minutes, the investigator called out from behind one of the containers. "Got something." We hurried over. He was holding a company vest, the same kind the yard workers wore, but this one had been discarded behind the container, half buried in gravel. Dane pulled on a glove and examined it. The name tag was still attached. Foreman R. Sutter. "Sutter's the actual foreman," the investigator said, checking his phone. "Works day shift. Been with the company for 8 years. I'll call him, see if he's missing a vest." Dane bagged the vest as evidence, and we walked back toward the main office. On the way, he asked me to describe the fake foreman in detail. Height, weight, distinguishing features, anything that might help identify him. I did my best, but the truth was, I hadn't gotten a great look. He'd been wearing a cap pulled low, and I'd only seen him for a few seconds before he disappeared. The investigator got off the phone. "Sutter says his spare vest went missing last week. He reported it to management, but nothing came of it. Figured someone just grabbed it by mistake." "Last week," Dane repeated, his jaw tight. "So someone's been planning this for at least 7 days, maybe longer." We spent another hour at the yard, interviewing workers, checking records, trying to find anyone who'd seen the fake foreman or noticed anything unusual. Nobody had, or if they had, they weren't saying. The yard employed dozens of people, most of them contractors or temps, and the turnover was high enough that unfamiliar faces didn't raise red flags. By early afternoon, we'd hit a dead end. Dane told me to go back to the motel in Pagosa Springs, stay put, and let him handle the investigation. I wanted to argue, wanted to be useful, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, and knew he didn't need me underfoot. So I drove back, checked into the same motel, and locked myself in the same room. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw the fake foreman's face, the way he'd looked at me when he realized I'd spotted him. Not angry, not scared, just calculating. Like he was already 3 steps ahead and I was just catching up. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Text from Dane. "Found Eugene Adderley. Meet me at the station." I drove over immediately. Dane was waiting in the parking lot, and one look at his face told me it wasn't good news. "He's alive," Dane said, "but barely. Flagstaff PD found him in a motel outside Williams, Arizona. Severe dehydration, possible drug overdose. He's in the ICU now, unconscious. Can't talk, might not wake up." Arizona? What the hell was he doing in Arizona? That's what I want to know. His truck was found abandoned at a rest stop near Gallup, New Mexico. Keys in the ignition, wallet on the seat, phone smashed on the floor. Someone drove it there, ditched it, and left him to die in a motel 300 miles away. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. "They got to him first," I said quietly. "Made sure he couldn't make the run, then put me in his place." "That's my theory," Dane said. "Question is, why you? What made you the target?" I didn't have an answer. I'd been asking myself the same question since yesterday, and I still couldn't come up with anything that made sense. I was just a driver. No enemies, no debts, no reason for anyone to want me dead. Unless, what if it's not about me, I said. What if I'm just convenient? Someone who'd take a last-minute load, no questions asked, someone expendable. Dane nodded slowly. Random selection. They don't care who dies as long as someone does. But why? What's the point? Insurance fraud, maybe. Or intimidation. Could be someone's trying to drive up insurance rates, force companies out of business, corner the market on towing contracts. Could be 100 different motives. He paused. Or it could be someone who just likes watching trucks burn. A chill ran through me. I'd heard stories about people like that. Arsonists, saboteurs, people who got off on destruction and chaos. But those were supposed to be rare, outliers. The kind of psychopaths you read about in true crime books. Not the kind of people who operated in broad daylight, impersonating yard workers and puncturing brake lines on mountain passes. "We'll figure it out," Dane said, though his voice didn't carry much conviction. "In the meantime, you need to lay low, I mean it. No driving, no going back to that yard, no contact with anyone from your company until we sort this out." I agreed, and Dane walked me back to my car. As I drove away, I watched him in the rearview mirror, standing in the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked small, suddenly, overwhelmed, like he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. That night, I sat in the motel room with all the lights on, my phone on the nightstand, Dane's business card next to it. I kept thinking about Eugene Adderley, lying in a hospital bed 3 states away, tubes and monitors keeping him alive. I kept thinking about the fake foreman, the way he'd vanished between the containers like smoke. I kept thinking about Veldon, his calm efficiency, the something he'd pocketed from under my trailer. And I kept thinking about the runaway ramp, the way my truck had shuddered to a stop, the glowing drum casting orange light across the gravel. How close I'd come. How easily it could have gone the other way. I didn't sleep that night either. 3 days passed. 3 days of sitting in that motel room, staring at the walls, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Dane called twice a day with updates, but the updates were always the same. No new leads, no arrests, no breakthrough. Eugene Adderley was still unconscious in Flagstaff. The fake foreman had vanished completely. No hits on facial recognition, no matches in any database. The stolen vest had yielded no useful prints or DNA. Veldon was still operating his towing business like nothing had happened, and without hard evidence linking him to the sabotage, there was nothing Dane could do except watch and wait. I was going stir-crazy. I'd never been good at sitting still, and 3 days of forced inactivity felt like 3 months. I'd watched every movie on the motel's cable lineup, read the same magazine 4 times, and worn a path in the carpet from pacing. My dispatcher had stopped calling after the first day. Dane had contacted the company and told them I was cooperating with an ongoing investigation, and they'd agreed to put me on unpaid leave until things were resolved. "No pressure," they'd said. "Take all the time you need." But I could read between the lines. The company was worried about liability, about being associated with a driver who'd been targeted by saboteurs. They wanted me gone, at least temporarily, and maybe permanently if this dragged on much longer. On the 4th morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Dane had warned me about potential harassment or threats, but curiosity got the better of me. "Is this Thatcher Kincannon?" The voice was male, older, with a slight rasp like he'd spent a lifetime smoking. "Who's asking?" "My name's Harlan Grise. I'm an attorney. I represent someone who has information about what happened to you on Wolf Creek Pass." I sat up straighter. What kind of information? The kind that could help put the people responsible behind bars. But my client needs assurances before they'll talk. Protection, immunity from prosecution, relocation assistance, the works. Why are you calling me? Shouldn't you be talking to the State Patrol? My client doesn't trust law enforcement. They've seen too many cases where witnesses end up dead or disappeared. But they trust you. Or at least they trust that you have a vested interest in seeing justice done. I don't understand. Who's your client? Can't tell you that over the phone. But if you're willing to meet, I can arrange a face-to-face. Neutral location, public place, Whatever makes you comfortable." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. But another part of me, the part that was desperate for answers, desperate to understand why someone had tried to kill me, wanted to hear what this person had to say. "I need to talk to Sergeant Dane first," I said. "Of course, but do it quickly. My client is scared, and scared people don't stay brave for long. You've got 48 hours. He hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Dane and told him about the conversation. He was quiet for a long moment. "It could be legitimate," he said finally. "Or it could be someone trying to lure you out into the open. Hard to say without more information. So what do I do? Let me run the name. Harlan Grise. See if he's a real attorney, check his credentials. Find out who he's represented in the past. If he checks out, we'll set up a meeting, but on our terms, with backup nearby. You don't go anywhere alone. Clear?" "Clear," Dane called back 2 hours later. "Harlan Grise is real. He's a defense attorney out of Durango, been practicing for 30 years. Mostly represents white-collar criminals, fraud, embezzlement, that kind of thing. But he's also handled a few whistleblower cases. If someone wanted to come forward with information about organized crime or corporate malfeasance, he'd be a logical choice." "So you think this is legit?" "I think it's worth exploring, but carefully. I'm setting up a meeting for tomorrow afternoon at a coffee shop in Durango. Public, well-lit, plenty of witnesses. I'll be there with you, along with an investigator from CBI. We'll hear what this person has to say, and then we'll decide how to proceed." The next day felt like the longest of my life. I woke up early, showered, dressed in clean clothes for the first time in days, and drove to Durango with Dane following in his cruiser. The coffee shop was in the historic downtown area, a brick building with big windows and outdoor seating. Dane parked across the street, and we went inside together. The CBI investigator, a tall woman named Moss, who I'd met briefly at the impound lot, was already there, sitting at a corner table with a laptop open in front of her. At exactly 2 o'clock, Harlan Grise walked in. He was older than I'd expected, maybe 70, with thinning white hair and a suit that had seen better days. He spotted us immediately and walked over, shaking hands all around before sitting down. "My client will be here in 5 minutes," he said, settling into his chair. "Before they arrive, I need to establish ground rules. Anything they say today is off the record unless we reach an agreement on immunity. No recordings, no notes, no official statements. This is just a conversation. Understood?" Dane exchanged a look with Moss, then nodded. "Understood. But if your client has information about ongoing criminal activity, we can't ignore it. We'll do what we can to protect them, but we can't make promises without knowing what we're dealing with." "Fair enough." Grias checked his watch, then looked towards the door. A minute later, someone walked in. I recognized them immediately, even though I'd only seen them once before. The clerk from the Alamosa yard. Bryn, with the purple streaks in her hair and the name tag. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the coffee shop like she expected someone to jump out from behind the espresso machine. She sat down next to Grease and folded her hands on the table, her knuckles white. "This is my client," Grease said. "She's agreed to tell you what she knows, but only if you can guarantee her safety." Dane leaned forward. "Why don't you start by telling us what you're afraid of?" Bryn took a shaky breath. "I've been working at the Alamosa yard for 2 years. It's just a part-time job, something to pay the bills while I'm in school. About 6 months ago, I started noticing things. Small things at first. Shipments that didn't match the manifests. Drivers who were supposed to pick up loads but never showed. Equipment that went missing from the inventory but was never reported stolen." "Did you report any of this?" Moss asked. I tried. I told my supervisor, but he just brushed it off. Said it was clerical errors, that the system was outdated and glitchy. Told me not to worry about it. She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. But then I started seeing the same guy around. He wasn't an employee, didn't have a badge or anything, but he'd show up at the yard 2 or 3 times a week. Always talking to the foreman, always hanging around the loading area. And then trucks would have problems. Brake failures mostly. A couple of rollovers. One guy died. My stomach tightened. What did this guy look like? Tall, maybe 6 feet, thin, wiry, had a scar across his left cheek, real noticeable. Wore a baseball cap most of the time, but I saw his face once when he took it off. Pale skin, dark eyes, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. That was him, the fake foreman I'd seen at the yard. I looked at Dane, and he nodded slightly, already making the connection. "Did you ever hear his name?" Dane asked. Bryn shook her head. "No, but I heard the real foreman, Sutter, call him V once, like it was a nickname or something." V, Moss repeated, typing on her laptop. "Could be short for anything. Vernon, Vincent, Victor, or Veldon," I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. Dane's expression darkened. "You think Hoyt Veldon's connected to this guy?" Moss asked. "I think it's too much of a coincidence that Veldon shows up to every brake failure on Wolf Creek, and now we've got someone with a name starting with V sabotaging trucks at the same yard where my load originated." Bryn was nodding. "I thought about that too. After the last incident, the one with you, I looked up Veldon's company. Turns out he's got family all over the valley. Cousins, uncles, nephews. Most of them work in trucking or logistics. One of them even works at the Alamosa yard in the maintenance department." Moss stopped typing. "Name? I don't know. I just saw it on an employee roster once, but I can get it for you if you give me access to the system." Dane pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. Moss continued questioning Bryn, asking about dates, times, any other suspicious activity she'd witnessed. I sat there trying to process everything. It was starting to make sense. A network of people working together, Veldon on the outside, handling the towing and insurance claims, while someone on the inside sabotaged trucks to create a steady stream of business. It was elegant, in a sick way, and profitable. Towing a loaded semi off a mountain pass could run $10,000, $15,000 easy. Multiply that by a dozen incidents a year, and you were looking at serious money. Dane came back. "I've got a warrant being drawn up now. We're going to raid Veldon's shop tonight, pull his records, see what we can find. And we're going to bring in every employee at the Alamosa yard for questioning." "What about me?" Bryn asked, her voice small. "You're going into protective custody," Moss said. "We'll set you up in a safe house until this is over. No one will know where you are except us." Grease looked satisfied. "And the immunity agreement?" "We'll draft something by end of day," Dane said. "She cooperates fully, testifies if it goes to trial, and we'll keep her name out of the public record. Best we can do." Bryn nodded, relief washing over her face. Grise stood, shook hands with Dane and Moss, and led Bryn out of the coffee shop. I watched them go, and then I turned to Dane. "You really think you'll find something at Veldon's shop?" "I think we'll find enough to make an arrest. Whether it sticks is another question. But yeah, I think we've got him." The raid happened that night. I wasn't there. Dane made it clear I needed to stay out of the way, but he called me around midnight with the results. They'd found documents linking Veldon to shell companies that owned the insurance providers I'd mentioned earlier. They'd found records of cash payments to employees at multiple fabrication yards across the San Luis Valley. And they'd found a laptop with detailed plans for future incidents, including photos of trucks, driver schedules, and route maps. Hoyt Veldon was arrested on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. The guy with the scar, identified as Veldon's nephew, a man named Virgil Talmadge, was picked up at a motel in Cortez. Eugene Adderley woke up 2 days later and confirmed that Talmadge had approached him in a bar, bought him drinks, and slipped something into his beer. He remembered feeling sick, remembered getting into his truck to drive home, and then nothing until he woke up in the hospital. The case made regional news. Trucking companies started auditing their security procedures. Insurance providers scrambled to distance themselves from Veldon's operation. And I became a minor celebrity in the long-haul community, the driver who survived Wolf Creek and helped take down a sabotage ring. But I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like I'd been lucky. Lucky that my brakes held just long enough. Lucky that the runaway ramp was where it was. Lucky that Dane had been suspicious enough to look closer instead of writing it off as driver error. I went back to work a month later, but I never ran Wolf Creek Pass again. I'd reroute through Monarch or take the long way around through Gunnison, even if it added hours to my trip. Some guys thought I was being paranoid, but I didn't care. I'd seen what happened when you trusted the wrong people, when you assumed everything was fine, because the paperwork said so. Veldon's trial started 8 months later. I testified, along with Bryn and Eugene, and half a dozen other drivers who'd survived similar incidents. The prosecution laid out the whole scheme, how Veldon and his network had been sabotaging trucks for years, racking up towing fees and insurance payouts while drivers died or got maimed or lost their livelihoods. The defense tried to argue that Veldon was just a businessman who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury took 4 hours to convict him on all counts. He got 30 years, no parole. Talmadge got 20. Several employees from the Alamosa yard took plea deals and got lighter sentences in exchange for testimony. And me? I kept driving. Different routes, different loads, but the same rig. I had the Kenworth fully rebuilt after the investigation. New brakes, new drums, new everything. Some people said I should get rid of it, that it was cursed or haunted or whatever. But I didn't see it that way. That truck had saved my life. It had held together just long enough to get me to the runaway ramp, and I wasn't going to abandon it now. But I did make some changes. I started doing my own inspections, double-checking everything, even if it meant I was late leaving the depot. I installed my own security cameras on the trailer, tiny wireless units that fed to my phone so I could monitor the load in real time. I kept a journal of every stop, every person I talked to, every detail that seemed even slightly off, and I never, ever ignored my gut again. If something felt wrong, I pulled over. If someone seemed too eager to help, I declined. If a route looked sketchy, I found another way. Because the thing about Wolf Creek Pass, the thing nobody talks about, is that it's not the mountain that kills you. It's the people. The ones who smile while they sabotage your brakes. The ones who offer help while they're calculating how much your death is worth. The ones who disappear into the trees while you're fighting to keep your rig on the road. I still drive past that runaway ramp sometimes, when I'm hauling through the Rockies on a different route. I slow down when I reach it, just for a second, and I look at the gravel berm where my truck came to a stop. There's no marker, no memorial, nothing to indicate that anything happened there. Just an empty strip of gravel leading uphill into nowhere. But I remember, and every time I shift into low gear on a mountain descent, every time I feel my brakes start to fade, every time I catch a whiff of something burning, I remember how close I came, how easily it could have gone the other way, and I keep driving. Because that's what we do. We push through the fear, ignore the nightmares, and keep the wheels rolling. We haul the loads that keep the country running, even when we know the roads are dangerous and the people can't be trusted, and the margins are razor thin between making it home and becoming another cautionary tale. 3 weeks after the trial, I got a letter. No return address, postmarked from a town I'd never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 sentences written in block letters. They didn't get all of us. Watch your mirrors. I showed it to Dane. He had it analyzed, checked for prints and DNA, tried to trace the postmark. Nothing. Whoever sent it knew how to stay invisible. Could be a hoax, Dane said, handing the letter back to me. Someone trying to scare you. Or it could be someone from Veldon's network who got away, letting you know they're still out there. What do I do? Same thing you've been doing. Stay alert. Trust your instincts. And if you see anything at all, you call me. I kept that letter, folded it up and put it in my glove box right next to my registration and insurance card. A reminder that the danger didn't end with Veldon's conviction, that there are people out there, on these mountain roads, in these remote depots who see drivers as targets instead of human beings. I still drive Wolf Creek's sister passes, still haul through the Rockies, still make my deliveries on time. But I'm different now. Harder, more careful, less trusting. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on a dark stretch of highway with nothing but the stars and the white lines and the distant glow of a town I'll never stop in, I check my mirrors, just to make sure no one's following, just to make sure I'm still alone. Because out here, in the mountains, you never really know who's watching, who's waiting, who's already 3 steps ahead, planning the next brake line to puncture, the next load to shift, the next driver to send screaming down a grade with no way to stop. All I know is this. I'm still here. Still driving, still alive, and I intend to keep it that way. I've been running freight through Montana for 16 years, and Marias Pass still doesn't feel real. It's one of those routes that shouldn't exist, a narrow slash through the Continental Divide where the railroads got there first and the highway came later, almost as an afterthought. U.S. Route 2 cuts through Glacier National Park territory, threading between peaks that scrape 10,000 feet, and in winter it becomes one of the most dangerous stretches of asphalt in the northern Rockies. Not because of the grade. Marias isn't steep like Wolf Creek or Donner, but because of the weather. Whiteout conditions can roll in without warning, dropping visibility to 0 in minutes, and when that happens, you're driving blind with nothing but painted lines and prayer to keep you on the road. The load I picked up in Cut Bank was straightforward enough. Drilling equipment for a site near Columbia Falls, about 120 miles west. Heavy steel casings, bundled pipe sections, a hydraulic rig disassembled and strapped across 3 pallets. Total weight came in just under 78,000 pounds, right at the legal limit, and the manifest was clean. I'd hauled for this client before. Energy sector, always paid on time, never any surprises. The dispatcher told me to take my time, watch the weather, and call if I ran into trouble. Standard winter protocol for Montana runs. I left Cut Bank just after noon on a Tuesday in late January. The sky was overcast but stable, temperature hovering around 18 degrees, and the forecast called for light snow starting around midnight. I figured I'd be through the pass and into Columbia Falls long before that, maybe even have time to grab dinner and find a motel for the night. The rig was a 2016 Freightliner Cascadia, solid and reliable, with new winter tires and chains already mounted on the drive axles. I checked the airlines, tested the brakes, verified the load straps twice. Everything was tight. Everything was ready. The first 60 miles were uneventful. I rolled through Browning past the Blackfeet Reservation, watching the plains give way to foothills and then to serious mountains. The road stayed mostly straight through that section, following the railway that parallels Route 2 for most of its length, and I kept the rig at a steady 55, letting the Jake brake handle most of the minor grades. Traffic was light, a few passenger vehicles, a couple of RVs heading east, no other semis. That wasn't unusual for this time of year. Most drivers avoid Marias in winter if they can help it, rerouting south through Missoula or north through Shelby, even if it adds 100 miles. But I knew the pass, respected it, and figured I could handle whatever it threw at me. The Ways station sat at the eastern approach to the pass, about 10 miles past the park boundary. It's a mandatory stop for all commercial vehicles. Montana DOT doesn't mess around with weight enforcement, especially on mountain routes where overloaded trucks can turn into runaway disasters. I pulled off onto the scale platform, watching the digital readout flash as the system calculated my weight. The booth was small, just a concrete block building with narrow windows and a speaker mounted on a pole. I'd been through this station maybe 30 times over the years, always the same routine. Pull onto the scale, wait for the green light, proceed if everything checks out, or pull into the inspection bay if they want a closer look. The speaker crackled. Shut down your engine and step inside. That was unusual. Normally they just gave you a green light or waved you into the bay for a quick visual inspection. Having to go inside meant paperwork, questions, maybe a full inspection if they suspected something was off. I killed the engine, grabbed my logs and manifest and walked across the frozen lot to the booth. The guy behind the counter was someone I'd never seen before. Mid-50s, broad shoulders, wearing a Montana DOT uniform with a name tag that read Q. Drummond, Weighmaster. He had that look of a lifer, someone who'd spent decades in the same job, watching the same trucks roll through, enforcing the same regulations over and over until it all blurred into routine. But his expression wasn't routine. It was tight, focused, like he was working through a problem he didn't particularly want to solve. "License and manifest," he said without preamble. I handed them over. He scanned my CDL, typed something into his computer, then studied the manifest for a long time. Too long. I watched him flip through the pages, checking the weight distribution, the load description, the route authorization. Everything was in order. I knew it was because I'd triple-checked it myself before leaving Cut Bank. But something about the way he was looking at the paperwork made my stomach tighten. "This manifest says you're hauling 78,000 pounds, he said, finally. "That's right." "Scale says 73.5. I blinked. "That's not possible. I watched them load it. Saw the certified weight slip from the shipper." "You got that slip with you?" I did. I pulled it from my folder and handed it over. He compared it to his screen, his jaw working like he was chewing on something unpleasant. "Shipper's scale in Cut Bank shows 78,000, he said. "My scale shows 73.5. That's a 4,500-pound discrepancy. Maybe your scale's off." His eyes flicked up to meet mine, and the look in them wasn't friendly. "My scale gets calibrated every month. Last certification was 2 weeks ago. It's not off." "Then I don't know what to tell you. I loaded in Cut Bank, drove straight here, didn't stop except for fuel in Browning. Nothing came off that trailer." Drummond set the manifest down and leaned back in his chair. "You mind if I take a look at your load?" It wasn't really a question. I nodded, and he grabbed a jacket and a flashlight from a hook near the door. We walked back out into the cold, and I followed him around to the rear of the trailer. The seals were intact. I checked them in Browning when I fueled up, but Drummond examined them anyway, running his gloved fingers over the metal clips, checking the serial numbers against the manifest. "Seals match," he said, almost to himself. Then he walked along the driver's side of the trailer, tapping the panels with his flashlight like he was listening for hollow spots. When he reached the front section, near the gap between the cab and the trailer, He stopped and crouched down. I watched as he shone his light into the undercarriage, moving the beam slowly across the suspension, the landing gear, the support beams. "You haul refrigerated loads?" he asked. "Sometimes. Why?" "You've got a reefer bracket on this trailer." "Yeah, it's a combo unit. Can run dry or refrigerated depending on the load." He stood up, brushing snow off his knees. "Reefer unit adds weight, usually around 1,800 pounds. That's factored into your tear weight, right?" "Should be. The trailer was weighed empty last month. That's the baseline they use for calculating load weight." Drummond nodded slowly, like he was turning something over in his mind. Then he walked back to the rear of the trailer and studied the doors. "I need you to break the seal and open it up." I didn't argue. I pulled the bolt cutters from the toolbox mounted behind the cab, cut the seal, and swung the doors open. The load looked exactly the way it had when I'd left Cut Bank. Steel casings strapped tight, pipe sections bundled and secured, hydraulic rig components nested on pallets with heavy-duty webbing holding everything in place. Nothing had shifted. Nothing was missing. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Drummond climbed up into the trailer and started inspecting the load, checking the straps, tapping the pallets, measuring the spacing between sections. He spent a good 10 minutes doing this, methodical and thorough, and I stood there freezing my ass off, wondering what the hell he was looking for. Finally, he climbed back down and closed the doors. "Load looks secure," he said, "but you're still 4,500 pounds light." "So, what does that mean?" "Means either the shipper's scale was wrong, or something came off your trailer between Cut Bank and here," he paused. "Or the load wasn't what the manifest said it was." I felt a spike of anger. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm saying the numbers don't match, and when the numbers don't match, I have to file a report. Could be an honest mistake. Could be something else. Either way, I need to document it." "And then what?" "Then you're free to go. But I'm flagging this shipment in the system. If you get stopped at another weigh station and the weight's still off, you're going to have a problem." He walked back to the booth and I followed, my mind racing. 4,500 pounds. That wasn't a rounding error or a calibration issue. That was real, measurable weight that had somehow vanished between Cut Bank and Marias Pass. But how? The seals were intact. The load hadn't shifted. Nothing had fallen off. I would have noticed, would have heard it, would have felt the change in how the rig handled. Drummond printed out a weight receipt and handed it to me, along with my license and manifest. "Drive safe," he said, and there was something in his tone that I couldn't quite read. Not hostility exactly, more like concern, or maybe warning. I walked back to my rig, climbed into the cab and sat there for a minute, staring at the weight receipt. 73,500 pounds. The number stared back at me, accusing, impossible. I pulled out my phone and called the dispatcher in Cut Bank, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried the shipping coordinator at the drill site in Columbia Falls, but got the same result. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. Someone should have been answering, but all I got was silence and automated messages. I started the engine and pulled back onto Route 2, heading west toward the summit. The sky had darkened while I was at the weigh station, clouds rolling in thick and low, and the first snowflakes were starting to fall. Not heavy yet, just a light dusting that swirled in the headlights, but I knew how fast that could change. Montana weather doesn't ease into storms. It detonates them. The road started to climb. Not steeply, but steadily. The grade pulling at the Freightliner as we wound through dense pine forest and open meadows buried under snow. I kept it in 8th gear, letting the engine work, watching the temperature gauge and the mirrors. Everything felt normal. The rig handled the same way it always did. The weight distribution felt right. The trailer tracked straight behind me. Whatever had happened to those missing 4,500 pounds, it wasn't affecting how the truck drove, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop running through the possibilities. The shipper's scale was wrong. Drummond's scale was wrong. Something fell off the trailer and I didn't notice. The manifest was falsified. None of those options made sense, but one of them had to be true. Weight doesn't just disappear. The laws of physics don't take coffee breaks. 10 miles past the way station, I saw another semi parked on the shoulder. Big Peterbilt, older model, covered in road grime and snow. No lights, no hazards, just sitting there like it had been abandoned. I slowed down as I passed, looking for signs of trouble. Flat tire, broken axle, driver in distress, but I didn't see anything. No driver in the cab, no footprints in the snow around the truck, no indication that anyone had been there recently. Just an empty rig sitting on the shoulder of a mountain pass in the middle of nowhere. I thought about stopping, about checking to see if someone needed help, but something made me keep driving. Maybe it was the weather, which was getting worse by the minute. Maybe it was the weird interaction at the way station. Or maybe it was something else, some instinct I couldn't name that told me stopping would be a mistake. 5 miles later, I saw another one. Different make, different color, but the same setup. Parked on the shoulder, no lights, no driver, no signs of distress or activity. This one had snow piled up around the tires like it had been sitting there for days, and when I passed I could see frost on the inside of the windshield. Abandoned, forgotten. 2 abandoned trucks in 5 miles. On a major highway, in winter. That wasn't normal. That wasn't normal at all. I tried calling dispatch again, still voicemail. Tried calling Drummond at the way station, but the number I'd written down didn't go through. Just a robotic voice saying the number was out of service. I pulled up the Montana DOT website on my phone, trying to find an alternate contact. But the signal was weak and the page wouldn't load. The snow was getting heavier. What had started as a light dusting was now a steady fall, big flakes that stuck to the windshield and piled up on the mirrors. Visibility dropped from a quarter mile to 100 yards to 50. I flicked on the headlights, the fog lights, the clearance lights, trying to make myself as visible as possible to anyone coming up behind me. Not that there was anyone behind me. I hadn't seen another vehicle, moving or parked, in 20 minutes. The road curved through a narrow cut between 2 rock faces, and as I came around the bend, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A snowplow sitting crossways across both lanes, blocking the road completely. The blade was down, cutting a furrow in the snow, and the cab was running. I could see exhaust pouring from the stack, but it wasn't moving. Just sitting there, engine idling, lights off, blocking the pass. I hit the brakes and the Freightliner slowed to a crawl. I stopped about 50 feet from the plow, put the rig in neutral, and engaged the parking brake. Then I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out. The wind hit me like a fist. Not just cold, but vicious, sharp enough to cut through my jacket and steal my breath. I pulled my collar up and walked towards the plow, boots crunching through snow that was already shin-deep. As I got closer, I could see someone in the cab, a figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the dashboard. They weren't moving. I knocked on the door, no response. I tried the handle, and it opened easily, and when the dome light came on, I saw him. An older man, maybe 65, wearing a highway department uniform and a heavy parka. His eyes were closed, his head tilted back against the headrest, and for a moment I thought he was dead. But then I saw his chest rise and fall, slow and steady. He was breathing. He was asleep. I shook his shoulder. Hey, wake up." His eyes snapped open and he jerked upright, confused, disoriented. He looked at me like he had no idea who I was or why I was standing in his plow truck. "You okay?" I asked. He blinked, rubbed his face with both hands. Yeah, What time is it? Little after 4. You've got your plow blocking the road. He looked out the windshield, seemed to realize where he was, and swore under his breath. Sorry, must have dozed off. He reached for the controls and started raising the blade, but his movements were slow, sluggish, like he was fighting through a fog. You sure you're okay? I asked again. You need me to call someone? No, I'm fine, just tired. Been running this route since 5 this morning, haven't had a break. He finally got the blade up and shifted the plow into reverse, clearing the road. You heading west? Yeah, Columbia Falls. He looked at me and something in his expression shifted. You came through the way station? About 30 minutes ago. Drummond working today? Yeah, why? The plow driver, his name tag said Ovale Foreman, didn't answer right away. He just stared through the windshield at the falling snow, his jaw tight. Then he looked back at me. You have any trouble there? Depends what you mean by trouble. He said my weight was off, 4,500 pounds light. Vale nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd been thinking. You see any other trucks between here and the station? 2, both parked on the shoulder. Looked abandoned. They were. He killed the plow's engine and climbed out, standing there in the snow with me, his face grim. Those trucks have been sitting there for 3 days. Highway patrol's been trying to figure out what happened to the drivers, but so far nothing. No distress calls, no accident reports, just gone. My stomach dropped. Gone? What do you mean, gone? I mean, they pulled off the road and never pulled back on. Trucks are intact, no signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just empty rigs sitting on the shoulder like someone parked them and walked away into the woods. I looked back toward my Freightliner, barely visible through the snow, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And Drummond, the weighmaster, what's his deal? Vale's expression darkened. Quincy Drummond's been working that station for 23 years. He's good at his job, real thorough, doesn't miss details. But lately, he trailed off, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Lately, he's been flagging trucks that don't need flagging, finding discrepancies that don't exist, sending drivers up the pass with warnings that don't make sense. Why? Don't know. Some folks think he's losing it, getting paranoid in his old age. Others think he knows something we don't. Vale looked up at the darkening sky, at the snow coming down harder now. Either way, I'd recommend you get off this pass before dark. Weather's turning bad, and when it gets bad up here, it gets real bad, real fast. He climbed back into his plow and fired up the engine. I watched him roll forward, clearing snow as he went, his taillights disappearing into the white. And then I was alone again. Standing in the middle of Marias Pass with 4,500 missing pounds and 2 abandoned trucks and a growing sense that something was very, very wrong. I got back in my rig and started driving west, pushing harder now, trying to make up time before the storm hit full force. But I couldn't shake what Vale had said. Drivers disappearing. Trucks abandoned. Drummond flagging loads that didn't need flagging. And 4,500 pounds that had vanished into thin air. The snow kept falling. The road kept climbing. And somewhere ahead, in the dark and the storm, something was waiting. The storm hit hard about 10 minutes after I left Vale and his plow behind. What had been steady snowfall turned into a full whiteout. The kind where you can't tell where the road ends and the shoulder begins, where your high beams just bounce back at you in a wall of white static. I dropped my speed to 20 miles per hour, then 15, leaning forward over the wheel and squinting through the windshield like that would somehow improve visibility. It didn't. The wipers could barely keep up with the accumulation, and ice was forming on the edges of the glass where the defrost couldn't reach. I'd been through bad weather before, spent a winter running loads through the Dakotas where the wind chill hit 70 below and the roads disappeared under black ice. But this felt different, more hostile. Like the storm wasn't just a weather system but something with intent, something that wanted me off the road. I know how that sounds, trust me, I know. But when you're alone in a cab at 4:30 in the afternoon, and it's already dark as midnight, and you haven't seen another living soul in half an hour, your mind starts making connections that don't hold up in daylight. The CB crackled to life, startling me so badly I nearly jerked the wheel. Static at first, then a voice, distant and distorted like it was coming through 50 miles of bad cable. Westbound traffic on Route 2, advising all commercial vehicles. Road closure imminent. Return to nearest. Repeat road closure. The transmission cut out before I could catch the rest. I grabbed the mic and keyed it. "This is westbound Freightliner at mile marker. I glanced at the roadside, trying to spot a marker through the snow. Couldn't see one. "Somewhere past the way station. Can you repeat that last? Did you say road closure?" Nothing. Just static. I tried again, cycling through all the standard channels. 19, 9, 17. Dead air on every single one. I checked my phone, hoping for even a single bar of service, but the screen just showed no signal in the corner, mocking me. I kept driving. What else was I going to do? Stopping in the middle of a whiteout on a mountain pass seemed like a good way to get rear-ended by someone who couldn't see me until it was too late. At least if I kept moving, I'd eventually reach Columbia Falls, or a town, or somewhere with lights and people and a working phone. The GPS had quit updating about 5 miles back, just showed my position frozen on a stretch of road that didn't match where I actually was. But I knew the general route. Stay on 2, keep heading west, don't take any turns. Simple. Except nothing about this felt simple anymore. The missing weight kept gnawing at me. 4,500 pounds. I'd gone over it in my head a dozen times, trying to figure out where the discrepancy could have come from. The shipper in Cut Bank was reputable, had been in business for 30 years, no history of fraud or mistakes. Their scale was commercial grade, certified by the state, the same kind used at weigh stations. The chance of it being off by that much was essentially zero, which meant either Drummond's scale was wrong, or something had actually come off my trailer between Cut Bank and Marias Pass. But the seals were intact. I'd checked them myself, both at the fuel stop in Browning and again at the weigh station when Drummond had me open the doors. Nobody had tampered with the load, and even if they had, even if someone had somehow broken the seals and resealed them without me noticing, what could they have taken? The load was drilling equipment, massive steel components, each piece weighing hundreds of pounds, strapped down with industrial webbing. You couldn't just grab a casing and walk off with it. You'd need a forklift, a crew, time. Unless the weight had never been there in the first place. Unless the shipper had falsified the manifest, loaded me light and pocketed the difference. But why? What would be the point? They were getting paid by the client based on equipment delivered, not on weight hauled. Shorting the load would only hurt them. I was still turning this over when I saw the lights. Faint at first, just a dim glow through the snow, but as I got closer they resolved into the unmistakable shape of a truck stopped on the shoulder. Not abandoned this time. The running lights were on, hazards blinking, and I could see exhaust pouring from the stack. Someone was in there, engine running, waiting out the storm. I slowed down and pulled up alongside, rolling down my window despite the cold and the snow that immediately blasted into the cab. The other truck was a Kenworth, newer model, and the driver had his window down too. He was younger than me, maybe 30, with a thick beard and a wool cap pulled low over his ears. "You okay?" I shouted over the wind. "Yeah," he yelled back, Just pulled over to wait it out. Can't see shit. How long you been sitting here? Maybe 20 minutes. You heading west? Columbia Falls. You? Same. But I'm not going anywhere in this. Road's a death trap. I nodded, understanding the logic but not agreeing with it. Sitting still on the shoulder in a whiteout was just as dangerous as driving through it, maybe more so. At least, if you were moving, you had some control, some agency. Sitting still, you were just a stationary target waiting for someone to plow into you. You hear anything on the CB about a road closure? I asked. The driver frowned. No, when? Few minutes ago. Transmission cut out. Couldn't get the full message. Haven't heard anything. Been monitoring Channel 19 since I pulled over. Nothing but static. That was strange. CB signals can be spotty in the mountains, sure, but we were close enough that if he was monitoring and I was transmitting, he should have heard something. Unless the transmission I'd picked up hadn't been local. Unless it had been bouncing off the atmosphere from somewhere hundreds of miles away. A random fragment that had nothing to do with Marias Pass or Montana, or anything relevant to my situation. You come through the way station? I asked. About an hour ago. Why? They give you any trouble? The driver's expression shifted, became guarded. Yeah, actually. Waymaster said my load was off. Told me I was running heavy. Wanted to see my permits. My pulse quickened. Heavy? By how much? 3,800 pounds. Accused me of overloading, threatened to fine me. Whole 9 yards. But my manifest was clean. Everything documented. Eventually, he let me go, but he flagged it in the system. 3,800 pounds. Different number than mine, but the same pattern. Drummond finding weight discrepancies that didn't match the paperwork. Only this driver's load was supposedly over, not under. Let me ask you something, I said. The scale at the weigh station, did you see the readout yourself, or did Drummond just tell you what it said? The driver thought about it. He told me I couldn't see the screen from where I was parked. Why? Because he told me I was 4,500 pounds under, but the shipper's certified weight said I was at 78,000, and now you're saying he told you you were over. Something doesn't add up. The driver stared at me, and I could see him working through it, trying to make the pieces fit. You think he's lying, making up numbers? I think something weird is going on at that weigh station, and I think it might be connected to those abandoned trucks. What abandoned trucks? I told him what Vale had said. 2 trucks parked on the shoulder for 3 days. Drivers missing, no signs of struggle or foul play. The driver's face went pale, and he glanced in his mirrors like he was suddenly worried about what might be out there in the storm. Jesus, he said quietly. I saw one of those, about 8 miles back. Peterbilt, looked like it had been sitting there for days. Thought maybe it broke down and the driver got a ride out. That's what I thought too. But Vale said Highway Patrol's been investigating and they can't figure out what happened. Drivers just vanished. We sat there in silence for a moment, 2 trucks idling on the shoulder of a mountain pass in a whiteout, while the storm hammered down and the light bled out of the sky. Finally, the driver spoke again. I'm turning around, he said. Going back to Browning, waiting this out at a truck stop. You should do the same. Can't. I've got a delivery deadline. Client's expecting this equipment tomorrow morning. Screw the deadline, this doesn't feel right. He was probably correct. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to get off this pass and back to civilization. But I'd been driving trucks for 16 years and I'd never missed a delivery, never failed to complete a run, and I wasn't about to start now. Maybe that was pride talking. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely. The need to prove that I wasn't scared, that I could handle whatever Marias Pass threw at me. "I'm pushing through," I said, "but you do what you need to do." The driver nodded, rolled up his window, and started maneuvering the Kenworth into a turn. It was a tight operation. The shoulder wasn't wide, and he had to back and fill several times to get the trailer pointed east. But he managed it. I watched his taillights disappear into the snow, heading back the way we'd both come, and then I was alone again. I got back on the road and kept heading west. The snow showed no signs of letting up, and visibility was still almost zero, but I'd committed now. I'd made my choice. All I could do was see it through. Mile marker 193 appeared out of the white, barely visible, and I used it to update my mental map. That put me roughly 15 miles from the summit and maybe 30 from Columbia Falls. An hour of driving in good conditions, but in this storm it could take 3 or 4. I settled in for the long haul, focusing on the white line at the edge of the road, using it as a guide to keep me from drifting into the oncoming lane or off the shoulder. The CB crackled again. Same static, same distorted voice. "Westbound commercial traffic. Immediate turnaround advised. Hazardous conditions. Avalanche risk critical." I grabbed the mic. "This is westbound Freightliner. Can you identify your location? Are you with Highway Patrol?" No response. The channel went dead again, and I sat there with the mic in my hand, staring at the radio like it might suddenly start making sense. Avalanche risk. That was new. Marias Pass did have avalanche zones. I'd seen the warning signs on previous runs, but they were all clearly marked, and the highway department usually closed those sections at the first sign of instability. If there was a real avalanche risk, Vale would have mentioned it. The fact that he hadn't made me wonder if the transmission was even real, or if I was picking up some phantom signal from a different pass, a different storm, a different emergency entirely. I kept driving. What else could I do? Around mile marker 197, I saw something in the road ahead. At first, I thought it was debris, a fallen branch, maybe, or a chunk of ice that had broken off from the rock face above. But as I got closer and my headlights hit it, I realized it was a person, standing in the middle of the westbound lane, facing my direction, not moving. I hit the brakes, but gently, remembering the ice and the weight and the fact that panic braking in these conditions was a great way to jackknife. The Freightliner slowed, tires crunching through snow, and I brought it to a stop about 30 feet from the figure. They didn't move, just stood there, arms at their sides, head tilted slightly like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. They were wearing what looked like a heavy coat and jeans, no hat, no gloves, and even from this distance I could see they were covered in snow. Not just dusted, covered, like they'd been standing there long enough for inches to accumulate. I put the rig in park, engaged the brake, and grabbed my flashlight. Every fiber of my being was screaming not to get out, to just drive around them and keep going, but I couldn't do that. If someone was in distress, if they needed help, I had to at least check. That's the code out here. You don't leave people behind. I climbed out into the storm and immediately regretted it. The wind was brutal, strong enough to stagger me, and the snow was coming down so thick I could barely see the figure even though I was walking straight toward them. I raised the flashlight, and the beam caught their face. It was a woman, older, maybe 50, with gray hair plastered to her skull and ice forming in her eyebrows. Her skin was pale, almost blue, and her eyes were open but unfocused, staring past me at something in the distance. She wasn't blinking, wasn't shivering, wasn't showing any signs of life except for the fact that she was standing upright. "Ma'am," I called out, raising my voice over the wind. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. I got closer, close enough to touch her, and that's when I saw it. Her lips were moving, not speaking exactly, but forming words, over and over, the same pattern repeating silently. I leaned in, trying to hear, trying to read her lips. The wind tore away any sound she might have been making, but I caught fragments, pieces of a phrase that didn't make sense. Not the weight, it's the balance, not the weight. I reached out to touch her shoulder, to try and snap her out of whatever hypothermic trance she was in, and the moment my gloved hand made contact, she stopped moving. Her lips stopped. Her chest stopped rising and falling. She just froze, and then she fell backward, stiff as a board, and hit the pavement with a sound like a tree trunk hitting frozen ground. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, and shone the flashlight down at her. She was on her back, eyes still open, staring up at the sky. Not breathing, not moving. I dropped to my knees and checked for a pulse, pressing my fingers against her neck, her wrist, anywhere I could feel for a heartbeat. Nothing. She was dead. Had been dead, maybe for hours, and somehow still standing upright in the middle of the highway. That's not possible, my brain screamed. Bodies don't do that. Dead people don't stand. But I'd seen it happen. I'd watched her fall, heard the impact, felt the cold rigidity of her limbs. I backed away, my boots slipping on the ice, and half ran back to my truck. I climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. My breath was coming in short, ragged gasps, and my mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen, trying to fit it into a framework that made any kind of logical sense. Hypothermia. That had to be it. She'd been caught in the storm, succumbed to exposure, and the cold had frozen her body in whatever position she'd been in when she died, standing upright. And when I touched her, when I disturbed the equilibrium, she'd fallen. Simple physics. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. Except bodies don't freeze that fast. Rigor mortis takes hours to set in, and even in extreme cold, the process isn't instantaneous. She'd been dead for a while, long enough for her core temperature to drop to ambient, for ice to form in her tissues. But she'd been standing, moving her lips, looking almost alive right up until the moment I touched her. I grabbed my phone, hoping against hope that I'd miraculously picked up a signal, but the screen still showed nothing. No bars, no service, no way to call for help or report what I'd found. I thought about getting back out, about trying to move her body off the road so another driver wouldn't hit her, but I couldn't make myself open the door. Whatever rational explanation I'd tried to construct was crumbling, and underneath it was something primitive, something that didn't care about logic or physics, something that just wanted to get the hell away from this place. I put the Freightliner in drive and steered around her body, giving it a wide berth. As I passed, I glanced in the mirror and saw her lying there in the middle of the road, already being covered by fresh snow. In another hour, she'd be invisible. Just another buried obstacle on a mountain pass that was quickly becoming impassable. The road started to climb more steeply. I was approaching the summit now, and the grade was pulling hard on the Freightliner, forcing me to downshift to keep momentum. The storm was worse up here, if that was even possible. The wind hitting the rig in gusts strong enough to shove me sideways across the lane. I could feel the trailer swaying behind me, the weight shifting, and for the first time since leaving Cutbank I started to worry that I might not make it through. That's when the headlights appeared in my mirror, high and bright, coming up fast from behind, too fast for the conditions. Another truck, running without caution, closing the distance between us at a rate that made my stomach drop. I eased off the throttle, giving them room to pass, but they didn't pass. They just stayed there, maybe 20 feet off my bumper, matching my speed exactly. I tapped the brakes, flashing my lights to signal them to back off. They didn't. If anything, they got closer. 15 feet now. 10. Close enough that I could see the grill in my mirror, a massive chrome face like something out of a nightmare, reflecting my taillights back at me. I keyed the CB. Vehicle behind me. You're following too close. Back it off. Static. No response. The truck behind me accelerated, pulling up alongside my trailer on the left. I glanced over, trying to see the cab, trying to identify the driver, but the angle was wrong and the snow was too thick. All I could see was the side of the trailer, a white box with no markings, no company logo, no dot numbers. Just blank white panels reflecting the storm. They stayed there for maybe 10 seconds, running parallel to me in the oncoming lane, and then they pulled ahead. I watched them pass, watched the blank white trailer slide by my windshield, and then I saw the cab. It was old, some kind of vintage Peterbilt or Kenworth. The exact model I couldn't tell, but it had that squared-off look of trucks from the 70s or 80s. And the driver, I couldn't see the driver. The cab was dark, no dome light, no dashboard illumination, just a black silhouette behind the wheel. But I could tell they were looking at me. Could feel their eyes on me through the glass, studying me, measuring me. And then they accelerated hard, pulling away into the storm, and within seconds their taillights had vanished into the white. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. 2 abandoned trucks, a dead woman standing in the road, an unmarked rig running dark through a whiteout. And somewhere ahead, a weigh station where Quincy Drummond was flagging trucks for weight discrepancies that didn't exist. Not the weight, the woman had said. It's the balance. What the hell did that mean? I reached the summit around 6 o'clock, marked by a small pullout with a snow-covered sign that read, Continental Divide, elevation 5,000 to 16 feet. Under normal circumstances, I might have stopped, taken a picture, enjoyed the view. But there was no view tonight, just white and dark and wind, and I sure as hell wasn't stopping for anything that wasn't an emergency. The descent on the western side was gentler than the climb, but no less treacherous. The road curved through dense forest and the trees blocked some of the wind but made the visibility even worse. I kept it in low gear, letting the engine brake do most of the work, tapping the pedal only when I needed to shave off a few extra miles per hour. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, and my neck was stiff from leaning forward, straining to see through the windshield. Around mile marker 187, I saw lights ahead. Not headlights, stationary lights, yellow and warm, cutting through the snow. A building. Civilization. I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. As I got closer, I realized it was a truck stop. Small one, maybe 4 or 5 pumps, a squat building that looked like it served as both a convenience store and a diner. 3 other semis were parked in the lot, covered in snow but clearly occupied. I could see light in the cabs, exhaust from the stacks. I pulled in, found a spot near the edge of the lot, and killed the engine. For a long moment I just sat there, letting the silence wash over me. No wind, no road noise, just the tick of the cooling engine and my own breathing. I was exhausted, wrung out, every muscle in my body tight with tension. But I'd made it. I was off the pass, I was safe, and I could wait out the storm here before pushing the last 20 miles to Columbia Falls. I grabbed my jacket and walked across the lot to the building. The door chimed as I pushed through, and warm air hit me like a gift. Inside was exactly what I'd expected. Rows of snacks and drinks, a coffee station in the corner, a few tables near the windows where drivers could sit and eat. Behind the counter was a clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Paulette. Rough night, she said. Not quite a question. You could say that. I walked to the coffee station and poured myself a cup, black, hot enough to burn. You been here long? Since 2. Supposed to get off at 10, but I doubt my relief is going to make it through that mess. She gestured toward the windows where the snow was still coming down hard. You come over the pass? Yeah, just barely. Lucky. Highway patrol closed it about 20 minutes ago. Eastbound and westbound. Nobody's getting through until the plows clear it. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Closed? Why? Avalanche warning, and a couple of accidents. They're saying it might be closed through tomorrow. She paused. You didn't hear the CB warnings? I heard something, but the transmission kept cutting out. Couldn't get a clear message. Paulette nodded. Yeah, the CB's been wonky all day. Atmospheric conditions or something. You're lucky you made it through when you did. I sipped my coffee, trying to process this. If the pass had been closed 20 minutes ago, that meant I'd been one of the last trucks to make it over. Maybe the last. The unmarked white rig had passed me near the summit. Had they made it through too, or had they turned around? You see any other trucks come through in the last half hour? I asked. Paulette thought about it. No, you're the first one since the closure. Why? Just curious. I saw another rig on the pass, thought they might have ended up here too. She shrugged. Could be parked at one of the other stops. There's a couple more between here and Columbia Falls. I nodded, finished my coffee, and bought a sandwich and a bottle of water. As I was paying, Paulette looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You hauling for Bridger Drilling? She asked. I blinked. Yeah, how'd you know? Saw your trailer when you pulled in. They've been running a lot of equipment through here lately. Big project up near Columbia Falls, I guess. You know anything about their loads? Ever hear about weight issues? Her expression shifted, became guarded. What kind of weight issues? Discrepancies. Trucks coming through the weigh station with manifests that don't match what the scale says. Paulette was quiet for a moment, and I got the sense she was deciding whether to tell me something. Finally, she leaned in closer and lowered her voice. There's been talk. Drivers saying their weights are off, getting flagged by that weighmaster at Marias. Some of them swear the loads were right, that something happened on the pass. Others think the station's got faulty equipment. What do you think? I think, she said carefully, that Quincy Drummond's been working that station for a long time, and he's never had a problem before. So, if he's suddenly finding discrepancies in half the trucks that come through, either something's wrong with his equipment or something's wrong with the trucks. Or something's wrong with the pass itself. Paulette stared at me, and for just a second I saw something in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Like I'd said something she'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to admit. You saw something out there, she said quietly. Didn't you? I hesitated, not sure how much to say, but the need to tell someone, to share the weight of what I'd experienced, was overwhelming. I saw a woman standing in the middle of the road. Dead, but standing, and when I touched her, she fell. Paulette's face went pale. Jesus, where? Mile marker 197, maybe 198, near the summit. She grabbed a phone from under the counter and dialed. I listened as she reported what I'd told her to what sounded like highway patrol, giving them the location, describing the situation. When she hung up, she looked shaken. They're sending someone to check it out once the storm clears, she said. But between you and me, you're not the first driver to report something like that. There have been 3 others in the last month. People standing on the road or walking along the shoulder, always in bad weather, always near the summit. And every time someone stops to help, they find the person's already dead. My hands were shaking again. I set my coffee down before I spilled it. What's happening out there? I don't know, but whatever it is, it started about 6 weeks ago. right around the time Drummond started flagging trucks for weight discrepancies. The pieces were starting to connect, forming a pattern I didn't want to see. Weight discrepancies, abandoned trucks, dead people standing upright. All of it centered on Mariah's Pass, all of it starting around the same time. Not the weight, it's the balance. I thanked Paulette, took my sandwich, and walked back out to my truck. The other drivers in the lot were hunkered down in their cabs, waiting out the storm, and I should have done the same. Should have climbed into my sleeper, locked the doors, and tried to get some rest before pushing the final stretch to Columbia Falls in the morning. But I couldn't shake what the woman had said. The balance. What balance? Load balance? Weight distribution? Something else entirely? I climbed into the cab and pulled out my manifest, studying it under the dome light. Everything looked normal. Load description, weight breakdown, axle distribution. But then I noticed something I'd missed before. At the bottom of the page, in small print, almost too faint to read. Special handling required. See attached documentation. I flipped through the pages, looking for the attachment. There wasn't one, just the manifest, the bill of lading, and the shipper's weight certificate. No special documentation, no handling instructions. Nothing. I grabbed my phone and tried calling the shipping coordinator again, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd picked up enough signal at the truck stop to get through. The call connected, rang twice, and someone answered. "This is Burl Tatham," I said, relief flooding through me at finally getting to say my own name out loud, at finally connecting with someone who might have answers. "I'm hauling load BDG 4721 to Columbia Falls, and I've got a question about Mr. Tatham." The voice on the other end was cold, clipped. "Where are you right now?" "Truck stop on Route 2, about 20 miles east of Columbia Falls. I came through Mariah's Pass and you need to turn around immediately." I blinked. "What?" "Turn around and return the load to Cut Bank. Do not, under any circumstances, continue west." "I don't understand. The delivery's scheduled for tomorrow morning. The client's expecting, the delivery has been canceled. Return the load to origin. You'll be compensated for your time, but you need to turn around now." "I can't turn around. Highway Patrol closed the pass. I'm stuck here until—" The line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, my heart pounding. The call had disconnected, and when I tried to dial back, I got nothing. No signal. Like whatever brief window I'd had to make contact had slammed shut. I sat there in the dark cab, the manifest in my lap, my mind racing. The delivery was canceled, but nobody had told me until just now, and even then, only because I'd managed to get a call through. If I hadn't called, if I'd just kept driving to Columbia Falls, what would have happened? Would the client have turned me away? Would someone have been there to receive the load? Or would I have shown up at an empty lot with 73,000 pounds of drilling equipment and no one to deliver it to? And why had they told me to turn around immediately? What was so urgent about getting this load back to Cut Bank? I thought about the weight discrepancy. 4,500 pounds missing according to Drummond's scale. But the shipper's scale in Cut Bank said the load was complete, which meant either something had come off the trailer, which was impossible given the intact seals, or it had never been loaded in the first place. Or the weight hadn't changed at all. The balance had. I climbed out of the cab and walked around to the rear of the trailer. The doors were still sealed, same metal clip I'd inspected at the weigh station, same serial number. I pulled the bolt cutters from my toolbox and cut it off, then swung the doors open. The load looked identical to how it had looked every other time I'd checked it. Steel casings, pipe sections, hydraulic components. But as I climbed up into the trailer and walked between the pallets, I started to notice something. The spacing was off. Not by much. Maybe 6 inches, maybe less, but enough that the weight distribution had shifted. The heavy components that should have been centered over the rear axles were now sitting slightly forward, putting more pressure on the drive axles and less on the trailer suspension. Someone had moved the load. Not removed anything, just repositioned it. Carefully, deliberately, just enough to throw off the balance without being immediately obvious. But why? I was still standing in the trailer trying to make sense of it when I heard the engine. Loud, unmistakable, coming from the direction of the highway. I jumped down and looked toward the road, and that's when I saw it. The white truck. The unmarked one from the pass. Rolling slowly into the truck stop lot, headlights off, moving like a ghost through the storm. And it was heading straight for my rig. I didn't think, I just moved, grabbed the trailer doors and swung them shut, fumbled with a spare seal from my toolkit, and snapped it into place with hands that were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the whole assembly. The white truck was maybe 50 yards away now, crawling through the lot with its engine rumbling low and deep, a sound that felt wrong somehow, like it was coming from inside my chest instead of from the vehicle itself. No headlights, no running lights, just that pale shape moving through the snow like something that had learned to imitate a truck but hadn't quite gotten all the details right. I ran back to the cab, yanked the door open and threw myself into the driver's seat. My fingers were numb and clumsy as I jammed the key into the ignition, twisted it, felt the Freightliner's engine roar to life. The white truck was 30 yards away now, angling across the lot to cut me off from the exit. I could see it more clearly in my mirrors. The cab was definitely an old Peterbilt, maybe a 359 or 379 from the 80s, but something about the proportions was off. The wheelbase looked too long, the hood too narrow, like someone had stretched it in places that shouldn't stretch. I threw the transmission into drive and stomped the accelerator. The Freightliner lurched forward, tires spinning briefly on the snow-packed pavement before finding traction. I aimed for the gap between the white truck and the fuel pumps, calculating angles and distances, praying I had enough room to squeeze through. The white truck accelerated too, matching my speed, trying to close the gap. 20 yards. 15, 10. I was going to make it. The gap was narrow but manageable, and the Freightliner was responding well, pulling hard despite the conditions. But then the white truck did something that made my blood turn to ice. It shifted laterally, sliding sideways across the pavement without turning its wheels, like it was being pulled by invisible cables. The whole rig just moved 6 feet to the left in less than a second, closing the gap completely, and I had to brake hard to avoid T-boning it. The Freightliner slewed to a stop, and I sat there with my heart hammering, staring at the white truck now blocking my path. The cab was maybe 10 feet from my front bumper, close enough that I could see details I'd missed before. The windshield was covered in frost on the inside, thick enough that I couldn't see through it at all. The chrome grille was pitted and corroded, not with rust, but with something else, something that looked almost organic, like the metal was diseased. And there were no license plates. Not missing plates, no mounting brackets at all, like the truck had never been designed to have them. I grabbed the CB mic with a hand that felt disconnected from my body. "Paulette, if you can hear me, I need help. There's a truck in the lot blocking me in, and I think—" The CB erupted with static so loud I dropped the mic. It wasn't normal static, wasn't the hiss and crackle of atmospheric interference. This was aggressive, purposeful, a wall of noise that felt like it was trying to push into my skull. Under it, buried deep, I could hear something that might have been voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once, layered on top of each other until the words became meaningless. I killed the CB and the noise stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight. I looked toward the truck stop building, hoping to see Paulette or one of the other drivers, someone who could witness what was happening, but the windows were dark. All the lights inside had gone out. The whole building was just a black shape against the white storm, and the other semis parked in the lot, the 3 I'd seen when I pulled in, were gone. Just gone. Empty spaces where they'd been sitting less than 5 minutes ago. The white truck's engine revved once, a deep, threatening growl, and then the cab door opened. I watched in my headlights as someone climbed down from the driver's seat. They were wearing what looked like a winter coat, dark and heavy, with the hood pulled up so I couldn't see their face. They moved slowly, deliberately, boots crunching through snow as they walked around the front of their truck and started toward mine. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run them over, to floor the accelerator and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't make myself deliberately hit another person, even one who was clearly not right, clearly wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. So I sat there frozen, watching them approach, and when they got close enough I could see inside the hood. There was no face, just darkness. Not shadow, not the absence of light, but a solid black void where features should have been. The figure stopped beside my driver's side door and raised one hand. Pressing it flat against my window, I could see the palm through the glass, pale, waxy, with fingers that were too long and bent at too many joints. And then it knocked. 3 slow, deliberate taps that echoed through the cab like hammer strikes. I didn't open the door. I shifted into reverse instead, cranked the wheel, and backed away as fast as I dared. The figure just stood there watching me go, that elongated hand still raised like it was waving goodbye. I got maybe 20 feet before the trailer jackknifed, the rear axles sliding on ice, and I had to stop and straighten out. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there at all. But the white truck was still blocking the exit. And now I could see movement inside the trailer. Shapes pressing against the panels from the inside, bulging outward like something was trying to push through. One panel buckled, then another. Metal creaking and groaning under pressure that shouldn't exist. Whatever was in that trailer, it wanted out. I needed a plan. Sitting here in the middle of the lot wasn't an option, and trying to force my way past the white truck felt like suicide. The building was dark, possibly empty. Possibly worse than empty. The highway was closed, but maybe if I could get back on Route 2, I could find another place to shelter, another truck stop, somewhere with people and lights and the kind of normal that felt increasingly like a memory. That's when I remembered the manifests, the special handling documentation that should have been attached, but wasn't. If there was something wrong with my load, something that had triggered all of this, maybe the answers were in the paperwork I hadn't received. And if the shipping coordinator had told me to turn around immediately to get the load back to Cut Bank, maybe they knew what was really going on. I pulled out my phone, knowing it was useless but checking anyway. Still no signal. The screen showed the time, 7:43 p.m., and the battery at 18%. I'd been on Maria's Pass for almost 6 hours, and it felt like 6 days. I pulled up my saved contacts and found the number for the Cut Bank depot, the main line that should roll over to an answering service after hours. Worth a try. The call connected. I heard ringing, once, twice, and then someone picked up. "Bridger Drilling, this is dispatch." The voice was male, young, unfamiliar. "This is Burl Tatham. I'm hauling load BDG 4721 and I need to speak to someone about Mr. Tatham." The voice changed, became colder. "You were instructed to return the load to Cut Bank. Why are you still en route to Columbia Falls?" "I'm not. I'm stuck at a truck stop on Route 2. The highway's closed and I can't. What truck stop? I looked around, trying to spot a sign, a name, anything. I don't know. It's about 20 miles east of Columbia Falls, right off Route 2. There's a convenience store and there are no truck stops on that section of Route 2. I felt the words hit like a physical blow. What? No, I'm sitting here right now. I talked to the clerk, bought coffee. There are other trucks. Mr. Tatham, listen to me very carefully. You need to get back on the highway and drive east. Do not stop. Do not investigate anything you see. Do not respond to anyone who tries to flag you down. Get back to the way station and stay there until someone comes for you. Do you understand? No, I don't understand. What the hell is going on? What's in my trailer? Silence. Then, you're not hauling drilling equipment. You never were. The load you picked up in Cut Bank is a counterweight. It's designed to balance something else, something that should never have been transported over Maria's Pass. And now that the balance has shifted, the line went dead. Not disconnected, not dropped. Dead, like someone had cut the phone line with scissors. I tried calling back, but the phone just showed "call failed" over and over, and then the battery dropped to 5% and the screen went dark. I sat there in the cab, trying to process what I'd just heard. Counterweight, balance. The woman's words echoed in my mind. Not the weight, it's the balance. I was hauling a counterweight for something else, something that should never have been on the pass. But where was that something else? In my trailer? In someone else's trailer? Had it been loaded without my knowledge, hidden among the drilling equipment, and when someone shifted the weight, when they changed the balance, it had, what? Escaped? Activated? Become something it shouldn't be? The white truck's horn blared, a long, sustained blast that rattled my windows and made my teeth ache. The trailer panels were bulging more severely now, some of them actually splitting, metal tearing with sounds like screams. And through the gaps I could see movement, something writhing, something that looked like it was made of too many parts assembled wrong. I had to get out of here, had to get back to the way station like the dispatcher said, had to find Drummond and make him explain what he'd known when he flagged my load. Because he'd known. He'd seen the weight discrepancy, and instead of just writing me a ticket or sending me back, he'd documented it and let me continue. He'd known something was wrong, and he'd let me drive straight into it anyway. I put the Freightliner in drive and aimed for the gap between the building and the fuel pumps, the narrow service road that had to connect back to Route 2 somewhere. The white truck started moving again, trying to cut me off. But this time I didn't hesitate. I floored it, felt the rig surge forward, and hit the gap at 20 miles per hour. The mirrors clipped the pump housing on one side and scraped along the building on the other, tearing loose with sounds of breaking plastic and glass. But I kept going. The trailer followed, fishtailing slightly but staying in line, and then I was through, bouncing over a curb and onto a narrow access road that did indeed lead back to the highway. I didn't look back, didn't check if the white truck was following, just kept my eyes forward, found Route 2 and turned east, heading back toward the pass, back toward the way station, back toward whatever answers Quincy Drummond might have. The storm had intensified impossibly. Snow was coming down so thick I could barely see the hood of my own truck, and the wind was hitting in gusts that shoved the Freightliner around like a toy. I dropped to 15 miles per hour, then 10, crawling through the whiteout with my hazard lights flashing and my heart in my throat. The road markers were completely buried, and the white lines had vanished under 6 inches of accumulation. I was navigating purely by feel, staying in what I hoped was the center of the lane and praying I didn't drift into a ditch or off a cliff. Around mile marker 191, or what I thought was 191, based on dead reckoning and desperation, I saw lights ahead, red and blue, flashing, cutting through the snow like beacons, emergency vehicles. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. Highway patrol. Someone official. Someone who could help. Someone who could explain what was happening and make it stop. I pulled closer and realized it was a roadblock. 2 patrol vehicles parked nose to nose across both lanes, completely blocking the highway. Behind them, I could see the bulk of a large truck, one of those portable command centers the police use for major incidents. Figures in heavy coats and reflective vests were moving around, setting up flares, positioning traffic cones. I rolled to a stop about 30 feet back and waited. A trooper approached, flashlight in hand, and I rolled down my window. The wind nearly tore it from my grip, and snow blasted into the cab with a fury that felt personal. "Road's closed," the trooper shouted over the wind. "You need to turn around." "I can't," I shouted back. "I need to get to the way station. The dispatcher told me to—" "The way station's 40 miles behind you, and the road between here and there is impassable. We've got multiple vehicles stranded, possible avalanche activity, and zero visibility. You need to turn around now and find shelter." "Where?" "Every place I've tried is—" I stopped myself. How did I explain that the truck stop had disappeared, that the lights had gone out and the other drivers had vanished? "I need to speak to Quincy Drummond, the weighmaster. It's urgent." The trooper's expression changed, became guarded. "Why?" "Because something's wrong with my load. He flagged it this afternoon, said the weight was off. And now—" I gestured helplessly at the trailer. "I need to talk to him." The trooper studied me for a long moment, and I could see him making calculations, weighing options. Finally, he said, "Wait here," and walked back to the command center. I watched him conferring with other officers, saw them glancing in my direction, saw one of them pull out a radio and make a call. This went on for maybe 3 minutes, and then the trooper came back. "Sergeant's going to talk to you," he said. "Pull over to the shoulder and wait." I did as instructed, maneuvering the Freightliner onto what I hoped was the shoulder, trying not to think about how close the edge was or what lay beyond it. The trooper waved me forward until I was level with the command center, and then a different figure approached, older, broader, wearing a parka with sergeant's stripes on the shoulder. He climbed up onto my running board so we could talk without shouting. "I'm Sergeant Kilmartin," he said. His face was weathered, lined with age and experience, and his eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion around them. "Trooper Moss says you're asking about Quincy Drummond." "Yes, sir. He weighed my truck this afternoon at the Marias Pass station, flagged it for a weight discrepancy. I need to talk to him about—" "Quincy Drummond didn't weigh any trucks this afternoon," Kilmartin said. "He's been in the hospital in Kalispell since last Tuesday. Pneumonia. He's on a ventilator." The world tilted. I gripped the steering wheel to steady myself. "That's impossible. I talked to him." He inspected my load, checked my seals, gave me a weight receipt. His name was on the uniform, Q. Drummond, weighmaster. Kilmartin's expression went very still. "You talked to someone at the weigh station this afternoon?" "Yes, around 3:30, maybe 4 o'clock. "What did he look like?" I described him as best I could, mid-50s, broad shoulders, the weathered face and careful movements of a career DOT employee. Kilmartin listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. "This him?" It was Drummond. Exactly as I'd seen him, down to the way his uniform fit and the expression in his eyes. "Yes, that's him." Kilmartin put the phone away. His jaw was tight, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Quincy Drummond has been in the ICU for 6 days. He's been unconscious the entire time. There's no way you talked to him this afternoon." I felt like the ground was dropping away beneath me. Then, who did I talk to? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Kilmartin pulled a notebook from his pocket and flipped it open. "The way station has been closed since last Tuesday, when Drummond collapsed on duty. We've had it locked down, no one in or out except our investigators. But you're the fourth driver in the last week to report stopping there and being weighed by someone claiming to be Drummond." "Fourth? Yeah? And all four of you were flagged for weight discrepancies. All four were told your loads didn't match your manifests." He looked at me hard. "3 of those drivers are missing. Their trucks were found abandoned on the pass. No signs of struggle, no indication of where they went. You're the first one we've actually been able to locate and talk to." The abandoned trucks, the missing drivers, it was all connected, all part of the same pattern. Someone, or something, was using the way station, using Drummond's identity to flag certain trucks. But why? What was the purpose? "What about the loads?" I asked. "The trucks that were abandoned, were their loads intact?" Kilmartin hesitated. "That's the strange part. 2 of them had empty trailers, completely empty, like they'd been offloaded somewhere between the way station and where we found them. But the seals were intact, the doors were locked, and there was no sign of any cargo ever having been in there. Empty trailers, intact seals, just like mine would have been if someone had removed the counterweight I was supposedly hauling. I thought about the shifted load, the way the weight distribution had changed even though nothing had been removed. What if the counterweight hadn't been physical? What if it was something else? Something that didn't show up on a scale but still had mass, still had presence. "Sergeant," I said slowly, "what if the loads weren't stolen? What if they were never there in the first place?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if someone's been sending trucks over Mariah's Pass with fake manifests, claiming they're hauling cargo when they're actually hauling something else? Or nothing at all? And what if the way station, the real way station or whatever's operating there now, is the checkpoint, the place where it gets verified?" Kilmartin was quiet for a moment. Then, "And if the weight doesn't match, if the balance is wrong, something happens to the driver. Not just the driver. Something gets released. Something that was being held in place by the counterweight." I told him about the phone call, about the dispatcher telling me I wasn't hauling drilling equipment, that the load was designed to balance something else. I told him about the white truck at the truck stop, about the panels bulging and tearing, about the figure with no face. Kilmartin listened to all of it, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring out at the storm. Finally, he said, "The truck stop you described, the one 20 miles east of Columbia Falls. That location burned down in 2003. It's been an empty lot for 20 years. I felt the cold seep into my bones, colder than the wind, colder than the snow. "That's impossible. I was there. I talked to the clerk. I bought coffee. I believe you," Kilmartin said. "I believe you experienced something. But it wasn't a functioning truck stop. Couldn't have been." He paused. "We've had reports of drivers seeing buildings that aren't there, talking to people who don't exist. It always happens during whiteouts, always on this stretch of the pass, and it always precedes a disappearance." The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture that made a terrible kind of sense. Mariah's Pass wasn't just a road. It was something else, something that existed in the spaces between points on a map. And certain loads, certain trucks, certain drivers, they triggered something, opened something, let something through that shouldn't be there. "The counterweight," I said. "It's not balancing cargo. It's balancing the pass itself, keeping something from crossing over. Kilmartin nodded slowly. That's the theory our investigators have been working on. There are old stories about this area, going back to before the highway was built. The Blackfeet called it a thin place. Somewhere the boundary between worlds isn't as solid as it should be. They avoided it when they could, and when they had to cross, they did it with rituals, protections, ways of maintaining the balance. But then we came along and built a highway straight through it, and we didn't know what we were doing. Or maybe we did, and we built it anyway. So what do? You need to get that load back to Cutbank, back to whoever sent it out in the first place. They need to restore the balance before he stopped, looking past me toward the rear of my trailer. His face went pale. I turned to look. The trailer was shaking. Not swaying in the wind, but shaking from the inside, rhythmic and deliberate, like something massive was shifting around. And I could hear sounds now, even over the storm. Deep groaning, metal under stress, and underneath it all something that might have been breathing. "Drive," Kilmartin said quietly. "Drive east, back toward the way station. Don't stop for anything. When you get there, pull onto the scale and wait. Someone will meet you. Who? I don't know, but every driver who's made it this far and followed those instructions has survived. The ones who didn't..." He didn't finish the sentence. He climbed down from my running board and signaled to the other troopers. They started moving the patrol vehicles, clearing a path through the roadblock. I waited until they were positioned, then shifted into drive and rolled forward slowly. As I passed the command center, I saw faces watching from the windows. Officers, investigators, people who'd seen things they couldn't explain and learned to accept it as part of the job. The roadblock fell away behind me, and I was alone again on the pass, heading east, back toward the way station where someone who wasn't Quincy Drummond had weighed my truck and set all of this in motion. The trailer was shaking harder now, violent enough that I could feel it through the cab, and the sounds were getting louder, more insistent. Whatever was in there, it was waking up, getting stronger, testing the boundaries of its containment. I pushed the Freightliner as hard as I dared, fighting through the whiteout, trying to ignore the way my headlights kept catching movement in the trees, shapes that loped alongside the truck on legs that bent wrong. The CB was screaming static again, and under it I could hear those voices, hundreds of them, thousands maybe, all speaking in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood. They were angry, hungry. They'd been held back for a long time, kept on the other side of a barrier that was weakening with every mile I drove. Around what I thought was mile marker 198, near where I'd found the dead woman, I saw lights ahead. Not emergency lights this time, just regular lights, warm and steady, cutting through the storm. The way station. I'd made it back. I rolled closer and saw the booth, the scale platform, the inspection bay, all exactly as they'd been this afternoon when I'd stopped here the first time. And standing in the booth, visible through the window, was Quincy Drummond, or something wearing his shape. It turned as I approached, and I could see its face clearly now. The features were right. The weathered skin, the careful eyes, the expression of someone who'd seen it all and wasn't impressed. But there was something underneath. Something that showed through in moments when the light hit at the wrong angle. A darkness. An absence. It raised one hand and pointed at the scale platform. The gesture was clear. Pull onto the scale and stop. I did what I was told. Rolled the Freightliner onto the platform, put it in neutral, engaged the parking brake. The trailer was shaking so violently now that the whole rig was rocking on its suspension, and I could hear metal tearing, seals breaking, the sounds of containment failing. Whatever was in there, it was about to get out. The thing wearing Drummond's face walked out of the booth and approached my cab. It moved with perfect human mechanics, nothing obviously wrong, but I could feel the wrongness radiating off it like heat. It stopped beside my door and looked up at me through the window, and for just a second I saw the real Quincy Drummond behind its eyes, trapped, screaming, begging for help that would never come. Then the moment passed, and the thing smiled. It reached up and knocked on my window. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't open the door. I sat there frozen, watching it, waiting for whatever came next. And that's when I saw them coming out of the woods. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The figures I'd glimpsed in the trees, the shapes that had followed me through the storm. They emerged from the darkness like smoke taking form, and they gathered around my truck in a silent circle, watching, waiting. The thing wearing Drummond's face knocked again. 3 more taps, harder this time, demanding. Behind me, in the trailer, something roared. The roar from inside the trailer wasn't animal. It wasn't mechanical either. It was something else entirely, something that existed in the space between sound and vibration, resonating in my bones and teeth and the base of my skull. The Freightliner rocked on its suspension, and I could see stress fractures spreading across the trailer panels like spider webs, metal warping and buckling under pressure that shouldn't be possible. The thing wearing Drummond's face stood beside my door, perfectly still now, no longer knocking, just waiting. And the figures surrounding my truck, I could see them more clearly now in the glow of my running lights. They looked almost human, almost convincing, but their proportions were wrong in subtle ways. Arms too long, legs that bent at too many joints, heads that tilted at angles that would have snapped a normal neck. They wore clothing that might have been real once. Winter coats, work boots, trucker gear, but now looked like costumes, like something trying to remember what humans wore and getting the details slightly off. I needed to think. Needed to figure out what Kilmartin had meant when he said drivers who pulled onto the scale and waited survived. Waited for what? What was supposed to happen here? Was someone coming to help me, or was this just a holding pattern? A way to keep me in place while whatever was in my trailer finished breaking free? The scale readout mounted on a pole beside the booth flickered to life, and I watched the numbers climb. 10,000 pounds, 20,000, 40, 60. They kept going, well past the 73,000 Drummond. The real Drummond, or the thing that had pretended to be him, had measured this afternoon. 80,000, 90, 100. The numbers accelerated, spinning faster, climbing into ranges that made no physical sense for a load that shouldn't weigh more than 78,000 pounds fully loaded. At 150,000 pounds, the display stopped. Then it started counting backward. 149, 148, 147. The numbers dropped steadily, like something was draining out of the trailer, transferring somewhere else. I looked in my mirrors and saw the figures around my truck beginning to move, swaying in unison like grass in wind, their mouths opening and closing in silent synchronization. The trailer shook again, harder this time, and I heard a sound like fabric tearing. One of the panels split completely, a jagged vertical tear that ran from top to bottom, and through the gap I could see nothing, empty space. Not darkness, not shadow, but genuine void, an absence so complete it hurt to look at. The tear widened, spreading like a wound, and more of the panel fell away. The void inside pulsed, expanding and contracting like something breathing, and I realized with mounting horror that the trailer wasn't containing something. It was containing nothing. A pocket of absolute emptiness that should have collapsed on itself but was being held open by the counterweight, by the carefully balanced load that someone had deliberately shifted. And now that the balance was broken, the void was growing. The scale readout hit 0 and kept going, -10,000, -20. The freightliner lifted slightly off the scale platform, suspension extending as if the truck was becoming lighter, shedding mass it shouldn't be able to shed. I gripped the wheel, feeling vertigo wash over me, the sensation of weight leaving my body like water draining from a tub. The thing wearing Drummond's face turned toward the trailer, and I saw its expression shift. The human mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something underneath that I couldn't properly process. Too many angles, too many surfaces, geometry that didn't follow rules I understood. It raised both hands, palms out, and the figures around my truck did the same. Hundreds of hands raised in perfect unison, and they started to speak. Not English, not any language I recognized, but I understood it anyway, the same way I had understood the voices on the CB. They were chanting, reciting something that felt older than the mountains, older than the road, older than the concept of roads themselves. A formula, a binding. Words that had weight and purpose and the power to hold back what shouldn't be held. The void in my trailer pulsed again, and something emerged from it. Not out exactly, more like through, like it was pushing against a membrane that separated here from somewhere else. I saw an appendage, or what might have been an appendage, something that looked like it was made of condensed static and broken light. It groped blindly, searching, finding the torn panel and pulling. The metal shrieked and peeled away like foil. The scale readout continued dropping. -50,000, -75. The freightliner was fully airborne now, hovering 6 inches above the platform, and I could feel the weightlessness in my stomach, the disorienting sensation of falling upward. My tools rattled in their compartments. Loose change floated up from the cup holder. The CB mic drifted past my face, cord stretching taut. More of the trailer tore away. The void was clearly visible now, a spherical absence maybe 8 feet across, perfectly smooth, reflecting nothing because there was nothing to reflect. And surrounding it, holding it in place like hands around a fragile egg, were threads of light so faint I could barely see them. The counterweight. The drilling equipment wasn't just ballast, it was anchor points, each piece positioned precisely to maintain tension on those threads, to keep the void from expanding beyond its boundaries. But the balance had shifted. The threads were slack on one side, taut on the other, and the void was stretching, elongating, testing its limits. The figures chanting grew louder, more urgent, and I felt the air pressure change. A sudden, crushing weight that drove the freightliner back down onto the scale platform with enough force to bottom out the suspension. The scale readout flickered, jumped to positive numbers briefly, then dropped back into negatives. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't working. Or it wasn't working fast enough. I needed to do something. Couldn't just sit here watching reality tear apart in my trailer while entities wearing human faces tried to patch it back together. Kill Martin had said to wait, that someone would meet me, but I'd been here for, I checked the clock on the dash, 18 minutes. 18 minutes of watching the void grow. Watching my truck defy physics. Watching the storm outside intensify to levels that made the earlier whiteout look tame by comparison. Then I remembered something the dispatcher had said during that brief phone call before the line went dead. The load you picked up in Cut Bank is a counterweight. It's designed to balance something else. Designed. Not accidentally balanced, not coincidentally positioned. Someone had engineered this, had calculated the exact weight and placement needed to contain the void, and that meant someone knew how to fix it. I grabbed my phone. Battery at 2%, no signal, and pulled up my photos. I'd taken pictures of the manifest back at the way station, when I'd first noticed the weight discrepancy, thinking I might need documentation. I scrolled through them frantically, looking for anything that might help, any clue buried in the paperwork. There, at the bottom of the shipper's weight certificate, below the official stamps and signature, was a handwritten note in pencil, almost too faint to read. Restore protocol. Reverse load sequence. Maintain 12 degrees offset. Verify anchor tension before release. Reverse load sequence. The drilling equipment had been loaded in a specific order, and I'd need to reverse it. But how? I couldn't exactly hop out and start rearranging 45 tons of steel while reality collapsed behind me. Unless the void pulsed again, and this time something came through completely. An arm, or the concept of an arm, made of that same static-light material, reaching out of the void and grabbing one of the threads. It pulled, and the thread snapped with a sound like a piano wire breaking. The void expanded 6 inches. The figure's chanting became frantic. The thing wearing Drummond's face turned back toward me, and this time there was no human mask, no pretense. Just the raw truth of what it was. Angles and surfaces and wrongness compressed into a shape that could almost pass for a person if you didn't look too closely. It pointed at me, then at the trailer, and I understood what it was telling me. Fix it. Restore the balance. Or everything within 100 miles would be pulled into that void, consumed by the nothing, erased from existence so completely that even the memory of it would vanish. I couldn't reverse the load sequence from the cab, but I could shift the weight. The Freightliner had air suspension, computer-controlled, designed to adjust pressure in individual airbags to level the load. If I could access the suspension controls, maybe I could redistribute the weight, restore some of the original balance even if I couldn't fix it completely. I popped the panel under the dash that housed the suspension computer. Wires and circuit boards, color-coded and labeled, accessible for roadside repairs. I'd worked on this system before, knew the basics, could manually override the auto-leveling to adjust individual corners. I started pulling connectors, swapping them, watching the dashboard indicators flicker as the suspension responded. The Freightliner tilted, the front end rising as I increased pressure in the forward airbags and decreased it in the rear. The trailer followed, angling upward, and I heard the load shifting inside. Steel casings sliding, pipe sections rolling, the entire mass of the counterweight moving backward. The void pulsed, contracted slightly, and one of the broken threads reconnected with a flash of light. I kept adjusting, trial and error, making changes and watching for results, trying to visualize how the weight distribution would affect the tension on those threads. Another thread reconnected, then another. The void was shrinking, pulling back into itself, retreating from the tiers it had created in the trailer panels. But I'd made a mistake. I'd shifted too much weight too fast, and now the rear axles were overloaded, sinking under pressure they weren't designed to handle. I heard the steel groan, felt the whole rig shudder as something in the suspension gave way. The trailer dropped 6 inches on the passenger side, jackknifing slightly, and the sudden shift sent the load sliding in the wrong direction. The threads snapped all at once, dozens of them breaking simultaneously, and the void exploded outward. It doubled in size, tripled, filling the entire trailer in seconds, and starting to eat through the remaining panels. The Freightliner was lifted off the scale again, spinning slowly, and through the windows I could see the figures being pulled toward the void, their bodies stretching and distorting as they were drawn into the nothing. The thing that had been... Drummond grabbed my door handle and wrenched it open. Metal screamed, and the door tore completely off its hinges, flying away into the storm. Wind and snow blasted into the cab, and the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath crystallizing in the air. The thing reached for me, its hand, if it was a hand, closing around my jacket and pulling me toward the door. I grabbed the steering wheel with both hands and held on, my fingers going numb, my arms screaming with the effort. The thing pulled harder, and I felt the jacket starting to tear, fabric giving way thread by thread. It was going to pull me out, going to feed me to the void, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then I heard an engine, loud, powerful, getting closer fast. I twisted around as much as I could and saw headlights approaching from the east, high and bright, cutting through the storm. A snowplow, Vale's snowplow, with the blade raised and the engine roaring, running straight toward the way station at a speed that was absolutely insane for the conditions. The plow hit the thing holding me at 40 miles per hour, and the impact broke its grip instantly. I fell back into the cab, gasping, as the thing was thrown clear, its body, if it had a body, crumpling against the scale booth. The plow kept going, sliding sideways, and Vale aimed it straight at my trailer, at the void. He hit it blade first, and the sound was indescribable. Metal on nothing, mass colliding with absence, the fundamental wrongness of the interaction making reality itself hiccup. The void collapsed inward, contracting so fast it created a vacuum that pulled everything nearby toward it. Snow, debris, the figures that were still standing, even the air itself. And then it was gone. Just gone, like it had never existed, leaving only a trailer full of drilling equipment and a snowplow embedded 3 feet deep in twisted steel. The freightliner dropped back onto the scale platform hard enough to crack the concrete. Every warning light on the dash lit up at once, and smoke started pouring from under the hood. I killed the engine, popped the brake, and just sat there shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Vale climbed out of the plow, moving slowly, checking himself for injuries. He looked up at me through the open door, and his expression was grim but unsurprised, like he'd known this was coming, like he'd been preparing for it. "You okay?" he called up. I couldn't speak, just nodded. "Good, we need to move. This place isn't safe, and we don't have much time before—" He stopped, looking past me toward the scale booth. His face went pale. "Christ, get out. Get out now." I looked where he was looking and saw it. The thing that had worn Drummond's face was standing up, reforming, pulling itself back together from the impact. And it wasn't alone. More of them were emerging from the woods, from the storm, from places that shouldn't have had enough room to hide anything. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all converging on the way station. I climbed down from the cab, my legs barely supporting my weight, and Vale grabbed my arm. "My truck, now!" We ran to the plow, climbed into the cab, and Vale fired up the engine. He threw it into reverse, tore the blade free from my trailer, and spun the truck around in a tight circle that left deep gouges in the snow. Then he floored it, heading east, back towards the summit, driving with the kind of reckless abandon that would have gotten him fired under normal circumstances. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the engine noise. "Getting us out of here before they realize we're gone. That way station's a focal point, a weak spot where the barrier's already thin. What you did, shifting the load, breaking the counterweight, you didn't just release what was in your trailer, you opened a door, and now everything on the other side knows it's there. So, where are we going? Cut bank. Back to whoever sent you out with that load in the first place. They're the only ones who can close this properly." We drove in silence for several minutes, the plow's headlights barely penetrating the storm. Behind us, through the rear window, I could see lights. Not normal lights, but the cold blue glow of the figures, dozens of them following us, keeping pace despite the plow's speed. "Those things," I said, "what are they?" "Don't know. Don't want to know. The old stories, the ones the Blackfeet tell. They call them the Hollow Ones. Spirits of people who died on the pass, who got caught in the thin places and couldn't cross all the way over. They're stuck between, and they're angry about it." He glanced in the mirror, and they're getting closer. He was right. The lights were maybe 50 yards back now, and closing. I could see shapes in the snow, running alongside the plow with inhuman speed, their forms flickering and shifting like they couldn't quite hold together in this reality. Vale pushed the plow harder, coaxing more speed out of an engine that was already screaming in protest. We crested a rise and started down the other side, and that's when I saw them ahead of us too. More lights. More figures. They were surrounding us, cutting off our escape route, herding us toward what? What did they want? "Hold on," Vale said, and cranked the wheel hard right. The plow left the road entirely, plunging into deep snow, bouncing over hidden rocks and fallen trees. We were heading straight for the forest for terrain that no vehicle this size should be able to navigate. But Vale didn't slow down. He just kept driving, using the blade like a battering ram, smashing through obstacles that would have stopped us cold under normal circumstances. Behind us, the figures poured onto the road, congregating where we'd turned off, but they didn't follow into the forest. They just stood there, watching, and I got the sense that they couldn't follow, that there were rules, boundaries they couldn't cross, and we'd just found one. Vale kept driving until we emerged onto a different road, a narrow Forest Service track that wound through dense pines and eventually connected back to Route 2, several miles east of the way station. He pulled onto it and finally slowed down, letting the engine cool, his hands shaking on the wheel. "You know how to reach your dispatcher?" he asked. I checked my phone. Still no signal, but the battery was somehow back up to 40%. Impossible, but I'd stopped questioning impossible about an hour ago. "I can try. Do it. Tell them we're coming in, and tell them to have someone ready to receive that load properly. The counterweight's broken, but the anchor points are still intact. If they can reposition the drilling equipment fast enough, they might be able to stabilize things before the void reforms." I made the call. It connected on the first ring, and this time it was a woman's voice, older, calm, with the kind of authority that came from years of handling situations exactly like this. "This is Bridger Drilling Crisis Management. Identify yourself." "Burl Tatham. I'm the driver on load, BDG 4721. The counterweight failed and we know. We've been monitoring." "Are you with Orson Vale?" "Yes." "Good." He knows the protocols. "Get to the Cut Bank Depot, loading bay 3. We'll have a team ready. Do not stop for any reason. Do not deviate from Route 2, and do not respond to any transmissions that claim to be from us. We'll contact you when you're within 10 miles. Understood?" "Understood." The line went dead. I looked at Vale. "They're expecting us." He nodded and pulled back onto Route 2, heading east through the storm. The drive to Cut Bank took 3 hours, 3 of the longest hours of my life. Watching for lights in the mirrors, listening for voices on the CB, jumping at every sound and shadow. But nothing followed us. The storm eventually broke, visibility improved, and by the time we rolled into Cut Bank just after midnight, it felt almost normal. Almost. The depot was lit up like a prison yard, floodlights on every building, armed security at the gates, and a team of technicians in hazmat suits waiting by loading bay 3. They directed Vale to park the plow, then swarmed my freightliner, disconnecting the trailer with practiced efficiency and towing it into the bay. Through the open door, I could see equipment I didn't recognize. Massive industrial scales, computer arrays, things that looked like they belonged in a physics lab rather than a trucking depot. A woman in a white coat approached, mid-50s, steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes that had seen things and learned not to flinch. "Mr. Tatham, I'm Dr. Corrigan. I need you to answer some questions." I spent the next hour being debriefed, telling her everything that had happened from the moment I left Cut Bank that morning until Vale pulled me out of the way station. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a tablet, and when I finished she was quiet for a long moment. "The void you described," she said finally, Did it appear to have any structure? Any pattern to how it expanded? It pulsed, like breathing. And there were threads, really thin lines of light, holding it in place. She nodded, like I'd confirmed something she already suspected. Those were containment filaments. The counterweight maintains them through quantum entanglement. Don't ask me to explain the physics, I barely understand it myself. What matters is that when you shifted the load, when you broke the balance, you destabilized the entanglement and the filament snapped. The void started expanding into normal space, and if Vale hadn't collapsed it when he did, she trailed off. What would have happened? Best case scenario? Everything within 20 miles gets pulled into a pocket dimension where physics doesn't work the same way. Worst case? The void keeps expanding until it reaches critical mass and collapses into a genuine singularity. Black hole, right here in Montana. I felt sick. And you people knew this was possible? You've been sending trucks over Marias Pass with these things in the trailers. Not things. Plural is incorrect. There's only one void, and it's stationary. The pass itself, specifically the area around the summit, sits on top of it. We don't fully understand why, but the geological surveys show massive gravitational anomalies, quantum fluctuations, all the hallmarks of a weak point in space-time. The highway construction in the 1920s must have disturbed something, created a tear, and it's been growing ever since. So the counterweights are temporary measures. We send them through periodically to measure the void's expansion rate and reinforce the containment. Usually, it's automated, remote-operated equipment that doesn't require human drivers. But sometimes the system fails, the automation doesn't work, and we have to send someone through manually. She looked at me. You weren't supposed to be on that run. The original driver, Eugene Adderley, he's one of ours, trained for this. He would have known how to handle the weight shift, would have recognized the signs before it became critical. But someone tampered with his truck, drugged him, and put you in his place. Who? Why? We're still investigating. But whoever did it knew about the void, knew about the counterweight protocols, and knew that putting an untrained driver on that route would likely result in a containment failure. We think there's a group. We don't have a name for them, but they've been interfering with our operations for years. They believe the void should be allowed to expand, that it's a natural phenomenon we're foolishly trying to contain. I thought about the figures at the way station, the thing wearing Drummond's face. Are they human? Dr. Corrigan's expression darkened. Some of them were once. Others, we don't know what they are. The void doesn't just pull in matter. It pulls in consciousness, identity, memories. People who die near it, their patterns get absorbed, and sometimes those patterns reconstitute on the other side. They're not ghosts, not in any traditional sense, more like echoes, recordings. And they can be dangerous because they remember being human, remember having wants and needs, but they don't have the constraints anymore. The rules that apply to us don't apply to them. What happens now? Now we restore the counterweight properly, reinforce the containment, and hope it holds for another 6 months. Then we'll do it again, and again, for as long as necessary. She paused. You did well, Mr. Tatham. Better than most civilians would have done in that situation. The fact that you figured out how to redistribute the weight, even partially, probably saved a lot of lives. I had help, I said, nodding toward Vale. He was leaning against his plow, smoking a cigarette, looking exhausted. Orson knows more about the past than anyone except the Blackfeet elders. He's pulled more drivers out of bad situations than I can count. We've been trying to recruit him for years, but he prefers to work independently. She smiled slightly. Says he doesn't like being told what to do. By the time they finished with my debriefing, it was nearly 3 a.m. They offered me a room at a company facility in town, medical evaluation, compensation for damages to my truck, and a non-disclosure agreement that came with enough zeros to make me forget most of what I'd seen. I signed it. Not because of the money, but because I knew nobody would believe me anyway. Who would? Dead women standing on highways, voids that eat reality, figures wearing human faces like masks. It sounded insane even to me, and I'd lived through it. They released me around dawn. My freightliner was totaled. The suspension damage from the weight shifts had cracked the frame in 3 places, and the trailer was a complete loss. Insurance would cover some of it, the company would cover the rest, and I'd be assigned a new rig within a week. Everything back to normal, like nothing had happened. Except I knew better. I spent the next 3 days in a motel in Cutbank, sleeping fitfully, jumping at every sound. On the 4th day, Vale came by. He knocked on my door around noon, and when I opened it, he was holding 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, handing me the paper. The headline read, "Avalanche closes Marias Pass. Highway may remain shut for weeks." Below it was a photo of the pass showing massive snowdrifts and what looked like a rock slide that had buried both lanes. The article talked about record snowfall, unstable conditions, the need for extensive geological surveys before the road could be safely reopened. "Convenient," I said. "Yeah, they do that sometimes. Close the pass for maintenance or weather when they need to run operations without civilian interference. This'll give them time to stabilize the void properly, reinforce the containment, maybe install some additional monitoring equipment. And the way station, being dismantled. Whatever was operating it, whatever was wearing Drummond's face, it's gone now. Real Drummond's recovering, by the way. Woke up 2 days ago, no memory of the last week. They're calling it a medical miracle." I sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot. "You gonna keep doing this? Running interference, pulling drivers out of situations they don't understand?" Vale shrugged. "Someone has to. The pass isn't going away, and neither is the void. Long as there's a road through there, there's gonna be incidents. Might as well be someone who knows what they're dealing with. You ever think about just closing the road permanently? Routing traffic around it? Been suggested. Gets rejected every time. Too much money invested in the infrastructure, too many communities that depend on the through traffic. And besides, closing it doesn't solve the problem. Just means nobody's watching when things go wrong." He finished his coffee and stood up. "You gonna keep driving?" I'd been asking myself the same question for 3 days. The smart thing would be to quit, to find some nice, safe warehouse job where the worst thing that could happen was a forklift accident. But driving was all I knew, all I'd ever been good at. And despite everything that had happened on Marias Pass, I wasn't ready to give it up. "Yeah," I said, "I'll keep driving, just not through Montana for a while." Vale smiled. "Can't say I blame you, but if you ever need anything, you've got my number." He handed me a business card, plain white, just a name and phone number, nothing else. Day or night, I mean it. I took the card and he left. I sat there for a while, looking at it, then tucked it into my wallet behind my CDL, just in case. 2 weeks later, I was back on the road. New rig, new routes, staying south of I-90 and east of the Rockies. I told myself I was just being cautious, avoiding winter weather, taking loads with better pay. But I knew the real reason. I wasn't ready to go back to the mountains. Wasn't ready to risk encountering another thin place, another void, another situation where the rules stopped making sense. But 3 months after that, I got a call from dispatch. Special load, they said. High priority, excellent pay, and they specifically requested me by name. The pickup was in Great Falls, the delivery in Kalispell. The route went straight through Marias Pass. I should have said no. Should have turned it down flat. Told them to find someone else, anyone else. But the thing about Mariah's Pass, the thing Dr. Corrigan and Vale had both tried to explain, but I hadn't really understood until that moment, is that once you've been there, once you've seen what's underneath the road, it doesn't let you go completely. There's a connection, a thread, a hook buried deep that pulls you back eventually. I took the load. The drive to Great Falls took 2 days. I picked up the equipment, more drilling gear, same client, same type of manifest as before, and headed west on Route 2. The pass had been reopened for 6 weeks, all repairs completed, roads cleared, official statements declaring it safe for travel. I'd monitored the news, hadn't seen any reports of incidents or disappearances. Everything normal. But as I approached the way station, rebuilt, repainted, with a new waymaster whose name wasn't Drummond, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the sense that I was crossing a threshold into somewhere that played by different rules. The waymaster was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a mechanical efficiency that suggested he'd been thoroughly briefed on what not to notice. He weighed my truck, 77,800 pounds, exactly matching my manifest, and waved me through without comment. I drove past the spot where I'd seen the dead woman standing in the road, past where Vale had smashed his plow into the void, past where the thing wearing Drummond's face had tried to pull me into the nothing, and I kept waiting for something to happen, for lights to appear in my mirrors or figures to emerge from the trees, or the CB to erupt with voices that shouldn't exist. But nothing did. The pass was quiet. The storm that had raged for days was gone, replaced by clear skies and weak winter sun. I made it to the summit, started the descent, and 3 hours later I was in Kalispell offloading the equipment, signing the delivery papers, collecting my pay. Normal, safe, boring. I should have felt relieved. Should have been grateful that I'd made it through without incident. That whatever lived in the thin places under Maria's Pass had decided to leave me alone this time. But instead, I felt watched, measured. Like I'd been allowed to pass as a courtesy, a professional respect between predator and prey, who'd faced each other once and lived to tell about it. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the next time wouldn't be so easy. I still drive that route sometimes. Not often, but occasionally, when the money's right, or the scheduling works out, or I just need to prove to myself that I'm not afraid. And every time I approach the pass, I check my mirrors more carefully than usual. I monitor the CB more closely. I keep Vale's card in my wallet, and Dr. Corrigan's emergency number programmed into my phone. Because the void is still there. The thin places are still thin, and the things that live in between worlds are still waiting, watching, learning. The balance holds, for now. But I've seen what happens when it breaks, and I know that eventually, inevitably, it will break again. The question isn't if, it's when, and whether I'll be close enough to help when it does, or far enough away to survive.